Hey guys, imagine a queen who faced down assassins, survived plague-ridden London streets, and danced court politics like a high-stakes chess grandmaster while wearing heels so deadly they could double as weapons. That's Elizabeth Atari in a nutshell, the ultimate badass monarch who turned every disaster into her personal highlight reel. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The year is 1558. Elizabeth Tudor steps onto the throne at the tender age of 25, fresh off a childhood more chaotic than a reality show reunion. Her father, Henry VIII, chopped and changed moms faster than a Netflix binge queue, leaving Lizzie, or the Virgin Queen, as spin doctors would later brand her, with a resume of half-siblings, ex-steps, and a head full of helpful Tudor gossip. Picture a young woman whose list of parental role models includes an executed mother, an absent dad obsessed with 6 wives, and a brother who ruled like he invented scurvy. Honestly, who wouldn't have baggage? Yet Elizabeth strolled into Westminster Abbey with just one grand strategy: play the court game harder than anyone else. She understood that in Tudor England, power was less about armies and more about optics, so she perfected the art of the royal selfie, portraits so elaborate that viewers could practically smell the incense and infer the exact shade of her rouge. Legend has it she owned more dresses than subjects, each embroidered with coded messages that only the court's inner circle could decode. See the scallop shell? That means I'm humble. Now marvel at the pearls on my neck. Those represent purity. But hey, look at that dagger in my corset. Just a suggestion. It wasn't all fluff and frippery. Elizabeth was thrust into a religious powder keg. Protestants versus Catholics, each side eager to torch the other's Bible and burn the heretics. One wrong word and you could end up as a midnight snack for the pyre. So what does our queen do? She invents the via media, the middle way, and calmly declares, let's agree we'll all worship mostly the same God and pretend we're good neighbors. Cue collective sigh of relief from a nation tired of ashes in their porridge. It wasn't a permanent peace treaty, of course, but it was enough to keep the hangman's noose on standby rather than in use. By the late 1560s, Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's Catholic cousin and occasional paperwork rival, decided that England needed a new CEO, or at least a different boss. Mary's supporters hatched assassination plots so elaborate they'd make modern designers blush. Poisoned gloves, cursed praying beads, and coded love letters rigged to explode. Elizabeth, always 3 steps ahead, caught wind of these plans courtesy of her spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, aka the original James Bond, minus the tux. Rather than panic, Elizabeth leaned into her inner thespian. She summoned Mary to her privy council, served tea, asked polite questions about Scottish weather, then calmly locked her up in England for 19 years. Talk about passive aggression. But let's not romanticize the ride. In 1563, a plague ripped through London like a misunderstood performance art piece. Dense fog, rats partying under every bed, and the occasional corpse clogging the streets. Elizabeth, being the show woman that she was, refused to flee to the countryside like some spoiled aristocrat. Instead, she personally oversaw the city's response, ordering daily reports on death rates, dispatching doctors, and occasionally visiting plague pits disguised under a hood, probably the earliest example of undercover boss. She even wrote letters of condolence to afflicted families, not exactly a Sunday stroll, but it bernadishished her reputation as a caring monarch. Meanwhile, piracy was booming faster than gossip at a royal wedding. English privateers, think proto-pirates with official documentation, were raiding Spanish treasure ships, filling the crown's coffers with gold faster than a medieval slot machine. Elizabeth christened them sea dogs in an act of pure branding genius. Chips flew when King Philip II of Spain realized his galleons were emptying like a bathtub without a plug. His solution? The Spanish Armada, a fleet so vast it could block out the sun, except it didn't. In 1588, Elizabeth, sporting armor that gleamed off-screen, watched from the cliffs of Dover as her smaller, faster ships outmaneuvered the behemoth armada, then prayed to the wind gods for an extra gale. The result: Spanish disaster, English triumph, and a post-battle PR campaign that declared England the mistress of the seas. The Queen's secret weapon? Hair worse than her enemies, according to at least one satirical pamphlet. But Elizabeth's reign wasn't just about drama on the high seas. It was also a golden age of culture. Shakespeare, Marlowe, and a legion of poets turned the English language into a flex muscle. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" they wrote, probably inspired by the fan and dimmed lights we just set. Under Elizabeth's patronage, the arts thrived like a rogue fungus in a damp basement. Everywhere, unstoppable. Affordable theater tickets meant that even commoners could watch plays, with subtitles in the form of shouted commentary from the cheap seats. And what did the Queen do? She occasionally slipped into a disguise, mingled with the audience, and judged acting chops on the fly. Bet ticket prices skyrocketed after those surprise visits. Yet, for all her legend, Elizabeth faced betrayals that would have made Romeo roll his eyes. Nobles schemed to depose her. Foreign powers courted her marriage offer like it was $1 million lottery, and siblings literally tried to kill each other for her approval. Yet she outlasted them all. The secret? She weaponized her marital status. By remaining unmarried, she became the perpetual bride of England, always available to negotiate alliances, control her nobles' ambitions, and avoid handing power to a husband who might siphon it away. Every suitor, from European princes to Russian czars, ended up as diplomatic pawns. "Thanks for the proposal, but I'm too busy slaying public enemy number one to consider family life," became her standard line. The first 2 decades of her reign were a masterclass in survival, navigating plague, assassination plots, religious wars, and looming invasions, all without a single recorded personal meltdown or embarrassing tweet. She hadn't invented it yet. Court life, by contrast, looked like a Renaissance-themed Hunger Games. Ministers whispering poison in ears, ambassadors trading coded letters under the dinner table, and gossip spreading faster than wildfire. Through it all, Elizabeth played queen like a seasoned poker player. Face unreadable, cards close to her chest, and an occasional raised eyebrow to signal, "I know." Stay tuned for part 2, where we plunge deeper into court scandals, secret romances, and the dramatic endgame that solidified Elizabeth's legend, and possibly the birth of reality TV as we know it. Part 2, Courtly Conspiracies, Faux Romance, and the Queen's Final Gambits. By the mid-1570s, Elizabeth had ruled for nearly 2 decades, and if you thought Part 1 was a roller coaster, buckle up. The Tudor court had become a pressure cooker of ambition, jealousy, and subterfuge worthy of its own serial killer gossip column. Imagine a grand hall where every smile hides a dagger, every compliment masks a web of lies, and every supper might end in a duel. And through it all strode Elizabeth, her famously steely green eyes missing nothing, her iron nerves preserved by an endless supply of rouge, pearls, and political cunning. First, the rise of a favorite, Robert Dudley's dangerous flirtation. Enter Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, childhood friend, rumored lover, and the closest thing to a consort Elizabeth ever had. Despite her public insistence on virginity, Leicester was charming in a roguish sort of way, a face that launched 1,000 poetic odes, a grin that could melt castle turrets, and hair that looked suspiciously like it belonged in a tampon ad. Their friendship ignited in youth, but by the 1570s it was a full-blown secret courtship that consumed courtiers' gossip like a bookworm on a library binge. Every court gathering became a subtle battle. Who could dance closest to the Queen? Who could catch her eye across the banqueting table? Who could slip her a love note without Leicester noticing? Envy roared through the ranks, especially among other suitors who whispered that Dudley had bewitched her with sorcery, binding her heart with enchanted rings and stolen glances. Meanwhile, Elizabeth exploited the fascination. She dangled Leicester before Europe's princes like a glittering carrot on a diplomatic stick. "Marry me, or don't. Just keep those Spanish corsairs out of my waters." Romance and political theater interwove seamlessly, each public jest hiding a pointed threat, each coy refusal cementing her position as the most powerful or most maddening bachelor on the continent. 2. A web of spies. Enter Sir Francis Walsingham. Of course, a queen that devious would have a secret service worthy of MI6. Sir Francis Walsingham, her principal secretary, built a spy network so pervasive that even the palace cat might have had ears and a sash reading "Top Agent." Walsingham employed code breakers, intercepted letters, infiltrated Catholic seminaries, and maintained an espionage budget that could have bought 100 suits of armor. His agents carried tiny books of invisible ink formulas, disguised as merchants or pilgrims, always ready to slip into a tavern and overhear treasonous whispers. One of his triumphs involved a brilliant bit of psychological warfare: forged letters purportedly from Mary, Queen of Scots, pleading with a secret agent to assassinate Elizabeth. When the plotters presented these letters to local authorities, Walsingham had them arrested, tortured until they named co-conspirators, then presented the evidence to the Privy Council. Mary's subsequent trial and execution in 1587 were arguably less about justice and more about Walsingham's relentless drive to neutralize Catholic threats. The Queen herself detested the thought of executing a fellow monarch, but Walsingham soothed her doubts. "My lady, consider this mercy, as the pyre cools, so cools rebellion." Mercy, Tudor style. Moondrum. Mary, Queen of Scots, cousin, prisoner, martyr. Mary Stuart had fled Scotland in 1568, expecting hospitality. Instead, she found herself imprisoned in England, first at Carlisle Castle, then at Bolton, ultimately confined in Fotheringhay Castle. For 19 years, Mary's imprisonment became a stage on which every European plot was performed. She wrote impassioned letters to Elizabeth, begging for mercy, swearing fealty, even sending knitted gloves with pleas for recognition. Elizabeth enjoyed protracted suspense. Her signature on Mary's death warrant was replaced 5 times, as Liz pondered whether executing a fellow anointed sovereign would stain her reign. Meanwhile, Mary's entourage schemed. Double agents, impostors dressed as priests, and runaway noblemen attempted to spirit her away. There was the infamous Throckmorton plot of 1583, involving Spanish money, a French invasion force, and coded messages hidden in barrels of figs. Walsingham cracked the cipher, arrested the conspirators, and named the code "the sweetest fruit with the sourest pit." Then came the Babington plot of 1586, so named after Anthony Babington, a young Catholic with boundless enthusiasm and zero operational security. His letters to Mary, smuggled in beer barrels, were intercepted and decoded. When Babington's men awaited signal to rise, they instead saw the executioner's block looming. Mary's trial was a grim pageant. She arrived in a ball gown, head held high, and defended herself with eloquence. Yet the verdict was inevitable. On February 8, 1587, Mary stepped onto the scaffold, her final act echoing through Europe like a funeral bell. 4. The Spanish Armada and the Queen's strategic theater news of Mary's execution reached Spain like the battlements of hell opening wide. King Philip II declared it an act of sacrilege and revenge. His armada assembled 130 ships, 30,000 men, long-range artillery, and swarms of musketeers, all under the command of the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a man who preferred baking cakes to naval warfare. Elizabeth turned the drama into theater. At Tilbury in August 1588, she donned armor, iron, cold, symbol of martial resolve, and delivered her "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman" speech. The moment was pure PR genius. She wept, she rallied her troops, she probably dabbed her eyes with lace handkerchiefs sprinkled with scented salts. When the Armada sailed up the English Channel, English ships, smaller, faster, armed with long-range guns, played hit and run with devastating effect. Fire ships broke the Spanish formation. Storms scattered the fleet. Many ships limped home battered and broken. Europe gasped. Londoners celebrated in the streets, hanging wooden galleons from their windows. Elizabeth's victory cemented her legend. No longer merely a queen, she was the savior of a nation. She hung a commemorative goblet in St. Paul's Cathedral, inscribed with "God blew and they were scattered." And in true Elizabethan flair, she had the inscription carved in both Latin and English, so that every sober citizen and every drunken sailor could raise a toast in the mother tongue. 5. Court intrigue, secret marriages, and poisoned puddings. With the Armada defeated and Mary gone, you'd think the court might catch its breath. Not a chance. Ambition frothed like a cauldron in every corner of Whitehall. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, arrived on the scene in the 1590s, charismatic, handsome, addicted to courtly praise, and convinced he was destined for greatness. Essex had swaggered into favor by leading a successful attack on Cadiz in 1596, earning Elizabeth's favor and a massive bonus in the form of a gilded hat that infamously kept sliding down his forehead. During a royal banquet, Essex tapped the Queen on the shoulder, an unthinkable breach of etiquette, and allegedly whispered, "Madam, for you I would die." The court gasped. Elizabeth's rumored response, "Die for me, sir? Pray spare me the performance." Essex's ambition soured into resentment. He plotted unauthorized military campaigns in Ireland, squandered royal funds, and convinced himself that he was the true heir to his mistress's heart. When Elizabeth rebuked him, he threw a tantrum in her bedchamber. Doors flung open, gilt candles extinguished, courtiers scuttling like startled mice. His rebellion in 1601 was a farcical attempt to win the city of London, involving midnight rides, hastily recruited followers, and a captured messenger who'd misplaced his orders. When troops besieged Essex's lodgings, he surrendered, begging Elizabeth for clemency. She, in a rare display of icy displeasure, demanded he kneel and apologize publicly. When he did, she turned her back, arms crossed, hair perfectly coiffed. The next morning, Essex's head was carried through the streets on a pike, crowds jeering, pigeons circling overhead. Outsmarting, the penultimate years, art, science, and the plague, returns. Even as rebellions flared, the cultural renaissance pulsed stronger than ever. In 1599, the Globe Theatre opened its doors, selling cheap standing room tickets for the groundlings to gawk at plays dripping with palace intrigue and doubled villains. Shakespeare's history plays, Henry V, Richard II, served as veiled commentary on the perils of ambition and the majesty of legit rule. Elizabeth's patronage of the arts was no random benevolence. It was statecraft. By nurturing a vibrant cultural scene, she fostered national pride and distracted restless youths from plotting treason. Her favorite pastime? Disguising herself as a commoner and slipping into the pit to watch new plays, occasionally heckling actors when their rhymes failed. Science also received royal favor. The Queen corresponded with polymaths like John Dee, whose interests spanned mathematics, astronomy, and alchemy. Dee's Monas Hieroglyphica, a cryptic symbol he claimed encapsulated the cosmos, was presented to Elizabeth as a gift. She admired the mystical flair, but reportedly told Dee to use his telescopes for more practical tasks, like finding Spanish ships. Meanwhile, physicians warned of yet another plague wave in 1603. Elizabeth, now approaching 70, surveyed her kingdom's health with the same rigor she'd shown in 1563. She authorized quarantines, ordered the burning of infected garments, and hosted weekly councils to monitor death rates. But unlike her younger self, she lacked the energy for clandestine visits. Instead, she dispatched trusted deputies and sent heartfelt letters to grieving families. It was a somber echo of her earlier undercover boss antics, proof that even the toughest queen grew weary of suffering. 7. Love, loss, and the ghosts of Tudor women. Though Elizabeth never married, her heart felt anguish. She mourned her mother, Anne Boleyn, whose execution haunted her like a specter. She mourned Mary, Queen of Scots, a cousin she both despised and pitied. She may even have mourned Dudley and Essex, friends turned rivals, lovers turned traitors. In her final years, portraits show her face lined and eyes tired, but still framed by red gold hair and stiff ruffs that proclaimed her royalty. Rumors spread of nightly visits from ghosts, Anne Boleyn weeping in the tower, Catherine Parr offering solace. Whether spirits or guilt, Elizabeth carried their voices to her deathbed. Yet Tavda, the swan song, the Queen's death and legacy. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth's final council met. She sat propped in bed, regal until the end, dictating her last directives, prayers for unity, assurances of continued Protestant rule, requests for her body to be dressed in crimson velvet, a color of royalty and blood. That afternoon, in a hush that fell over Whitehall, she exhaled her last. Courtiers wept, doctors wept, the nation wept, and somewhere a bard penned the earliest obituary. Her coffin, draped in black velvet and adorned with pearls, lay in state for weeks. Crowds filed past, clutching rosaries and candles, many lamenting the passing of their mother sovereign. Yet death could not still her legend. James VI of Scotland, Mary's son, ascended as James I of England, uniting the crowns. He wisely preserved Elizabeth's government, advisors, and religious settlement, ensuring that her via media endured. Meanwhile, playwrights immortalized her reign. "That was our queen," they wrote, "a woman more valiant than any man." Merchants sold Elizabethan souvenirs, tiny wooden ships, pearls simulated in glass, broadsheets recounting her triumphs. Her influence rippled through centuries. The concept of the cult of personality, the use of propaganda, the delicate balancing act between mercy and ruthlessness, all Elizabethan exports. Divyadi. Why Elizabeth still rocks our world. Fast forward 400 years. Elizabeth's name evokes images of fortitude, intelligence, and style on warrior level. She pioneered statecraft by mastering public perception. Every portrait, procession, and pronouncement carefully orchestrated. She navigated religious extremism with pragmatism. She wielded marriage negotiations as diplomatic weapons. She survived plagues, wars, assassinations, and family betrayals. All without Twitter, without cameras, without even a proper mirror in every room. Imagine her scrolling through our social feeds. She'd rewrite hashtags faster than you can unfollow your ex. Her greatest legacy, though, lies not in battles won or treaties signed, but in the audacity of her example. A woman ruling an age of men, turning vulnerability into strength, and transforming every crisis into a stage on which she shone brightest. The world may have changed, but her playbook remains relevant. Craft your image, control your narrative, and remember that true power often lies in the art of calculated restraint. Thus concludes part 2 of our sardonic dive into the nightmare fuel of Tudor survival. Stay with us for part 3, where we'll explore the Queen's final years, her scientific obsessions, and the uncanny ways she prepared her country for the dawn of a new era without ever dropping her guard or losing her ruff. Part 3, Science, Schemes, and the Crown's Balance Sheet. By the late 1580s, Elizabeth I had survived assassins, plotted lovers, and a fleet-sized temper tantrum from Spain. But while Europe cheered and pamphleteers penned ballads in her honor, a quieter drama unfolded behind palace doors, one of alchemy, new worlds, and a royal purse so stretched it creaked like a haunted ship. In this installment, we delve into Elizabeth's fascination with science, or what passed for it, her global ambitions, and the mounting financial tightrope that threatened to undo even her iron will. First, court alchemists and stargazers. If you thought Tudor science meant ducks in a barrel, think again. Elizabeth's court buzzed with natural philosophers who fancied themselves modern mad scientists. Leading the charge was Dr. John Dee, astrologer extraordinaire, alchemist, and occasional spy. Dee claimed to speak to angels through a crystal sphere, an early prototype of Snapchat, minus the filters. He advised the Queen on cosmic correspondences, Mars favors campaigns, he'd murmur, and concocted elixirs promising longevity. Elizabeth, intrigued by potential cures for her persistent headaches, tolerated Dee's eccentricities, missing teeth, stained robes, cryptic symbols, so long as his star charts never predicted a solar eclipse on her coronation anniversary. Together, they pored over manuscripts in the Great Library at Mortlake, commissioning translations of Euclid and the Hermetic Corpus. Dee even proposed a Monas Hieroglyphica medal bearing mystical glyphs said to unify the universe's hidden forces. Elizabeth admired its craftsmanship and allowed it as a court novelty, while privately hoping it might help her outwit rivals in more earthly contests. Though Dee never quite perfected gold from lead, his network of contacts in Europe provided invaluable intelligence on Catholic plots, blurring the line between pseudoscience and espionage. Dusra. Plantations and Roanoke's missing colony science wasn't the only exotic experiment on Elizabeth's docket. The Queen set her sights on the New World, eager to plant English flags where Spanish conquistadors had left nothing but burned villages. Under her patent, Sir Walter Raleigh organized expeditions to Roanoke Island, modern-day North Carolina, envisioning tobacco plantations, gold mines, and a cash crop dubbed Virginia weed. In 1585, Ralph Lane's settlers built crude fortifications and fended off hostile encounters with local tribes, only to return home starving with more questions than answers. Undeterred, Raleigh sent a second group in 1587 under Governor John White. Among their first acts was engraving Croatone on a fence post. White's only clue when he returned to England for supplies. 2 years later, he came back to find the colonists vanished, homes dismantled, and no bodies to mourn. The lost colony became Elizabethan lore, a ghost story of ambition gone awry, a monument to the perils of underfunded enterprise. Privately, the Queen lamented sunk costs but valued the cautionary tale. Colonial ventures were not just about planting flags, they required money, manpower, and better maps than the scribbles Raleigh furnished. Moondrum, the royal purse, monopoly madness and debt juggling. Speaking of money, the crown's coffers groaned under the weight of war expenses, lavish court entertainments, and Elizabeth's own sartorial splurges. Despite the influx of bullion from pirated Spanish galleons, the exchequer resembled a frat house budget, outgo far outstripped income. To patch holes in the treasury, Elizabeth granted monopolies on everyday goods: salt, playing cards, starch, even drinking leather, a urine-based fabric cleaner beloved by the gentry. Monopolists paid handsome fees for the privilege, but the public groaned under inflated prices. In 1601, the House of Commons erupted over monopoly evil, sending petitions so eloquent they could have been penned by Bacon himself. Elizabeth, ever the politician, met with Commons leaders in the Painted Chamber. With a sigh theatrical enough for the Globe, she conceded that "I perceive these things breed offense and many inconveniences," then revoked the most egregious patents, but not before pocketing enough revenue to fund another year of court masques. It was a masterclass in blame diversion. "Yes, these are my monopolies, but look how magnanimously I rescind them." The crowd dispersed satisfied, her coffers replenished, if only temporarily. Non gavda, architecture, masks, and the never-ending roughs. While financiers fretted, Elizabeth indulged in what we might call royal retail therapy. She commissioned new palaces, Richmond, Nonsuch, and Westminster's Whitehall, each a stage for her elaborate entertainments. Masks became the ultimate Tudor reality show. Prologues in verse, dancers in mythological garb, proclamations of Cupid and Bacchus, and surprise appearances by the Queen herself. Masked, of course, so that noble audiences could marvel at her form, without violating court protocol. Ruffs flourished as fashion statements and financial albatrosses. Starches arrived from the Netherlands at eye-watering expense. Seashell needles drilled for hundreds of hours to weave lace, and courtiers spent fortunes simply sustaining the silhouette that framed Elizabeth's face like a halo. Some whispered that ruffs were less about vanity and more about power. The larger your ruff, the bigger your political reach. Elizabeth's private chambers housed a rucking room solely to wash, iron, and starch her collection, an olfactory nightmare of vinegar fumes, but a visual symphony of crisp, white elegance. Eindavde, the last plague and the Queen's waning vigor. Just as the 17th century peaked around the horizon, plague returned with customary brutality. In 1603, London saw death rates rival the horrors of 1563. Fever, buboes, and the macabre sight of physicians swathed in waxed leather masks. Elizabeth, now in her late 60s and plagued by gout, delegated much of the oversight to Lord Deputy Salisbury. Yet she summoned weekly health councils, reviewed reports of bills of mortality, and authorized the burning of contaminated rags, proving that even an aging queen could not escape the grind of crisis management. It was during these dark days that Elizabeth's energy finally flickered. She spent more hours in bedchamber discussions and fewer inspecting city hospitals. Courtiers noted a pallor in her cheeks, a tremble in her hand when signing charters, and a reluctance to grant audiences lasting more than a few minutes. But never once did she relinquish the costume of sovereignty. Her draperies still gleamed with gold thread, her jewels still dazzled, and her voice, though softer, retained its unmistakable command. Aravde, the king in waiting, James VI in succession. Shadows, Elizabeth's most delicate act was the question she dared not name. Succession. By law and custom, an English queen should marry and produce an heir. But the Virgin Queen had weaponized her single status for decades. Still, the Tudor line dimmed without a direct successor. All eyes turned to James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart, the very cousin Elizabeth had executed. Diplomatically, she entertained his envoys, exchanged ornate gifts, and allowed whispered rumors of a future union, even as she publicly demurred. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth's council negotiated quietly, maintain the Protestant settlement, protect Puritan interests, and secure her chosen heir's safety. She issued secret warrants ensuring James could claim England's throne unmolested, provided he affirmed the Church of England's via media. And so, in late March 1603, as Elizabeth's strength waned, she summoned Sir Robert Cecil. "My service to the King of Scotland, and farewell," she whispered, the first true admission that the Tudor curtain was about to fall. Year-Avda, courtly ghost stories and final reflections. Amid these political maneuvers lay the final, more spectral dramas that haunted Elizabeth's court. Anne Boleyn's ghost reportedly emerged in the Globe's backstage corridors, muttering to her daughter's portrait. Courtiers swore they heard Mary Queen of Scots' lament echoing through Fotheringay's empty halls, and some claimed to glimpse Elizabeth, herself in spectral purpose, inspecting palace windows at midnight. Whether these were hauntings or collective guilt, they underscored the eerie legacy Elizabeth carried, one of triumph and tragedy intimately entwined. Stay tuned for Part 4, where we will witness Elizabeth's final curtain call, the solemn rituals of her death, the delicate handover to James I, and the enduring myths that cast her as the ultimate badass queen, her voice immortalized in every whisper of courage, cunning, and the high-stakes theater of power. Part 4, the final curtain, death, dynasty, and the Queen's undying specter. As Elizabeth's diamond jubilee faded into memory, the court at Whitehall felt a subtle shift, like the final curtain of a splendid play fluttering before its descent. In these twilight years, our Queen balanced between statesmanship and sentiment, legacy and loss, all while ensuring that her story would outlive her tumbling roughs and even the mightiest of her enemies. First, the waning spotlight, aging sovereignty and stiff upper ruffs. By 1600, Elizabeth was no longer the fiery 25-year-old who had galloped across the tilt yard or defied the Armada with fiery rhetoric. Decades of plague-dodging, continent-shaking politics and glittering court spectacles had exacted a toll. She moved with measured grace, aided by attendants who prevented her from tripping over her ever-expanding ruffs. Those circlets of starch so vast they could double as personal landing strips for court pigeons. Yet even in her autumn, Elizabeth refused to fade quietly into brocade and widow's weeds. She continued to hold audiences in the white and presence chambers, receiving ambassadors whose nations quaked at her jeweled collar before presenting their supplications. Rumor spread that her voice, once like a polished bell, had softened to a raspy purr, an intimate reminder that every monarch's power is housed in mortal flesh. Her wardrobe, however, remained unbowed. Every stitch of crimson velvet, every silver-threaded mantle, and every strand of pearls spoke a silent truth. Though time might gnaw at bone and breath, the image of Elizabeth, radiant, immovable, would remain untarnished. Portrait after portrait was dispatched to foreign courts, each featuring her alabaster forehead, her hallmark ruby-red hair, and a gaze that challenged viewers. "I rule still. Do you dare oppose me?" Dusra, the final parliament, a kingdom's last plea. In the chill of November 1601, Elizabeth convened what would be her final parliament. Members of the Commons arrived with petitions weighted by grievances, land enclosures, lingering poverty, and tithes that kept farmers perpetually kneeling in debt. Earl of Salisbury, her ever-steady Lord Treasurer, delivered the Queen's opening speech, praising her unceasing vigilance, while deftly steering debate away from the most explosive issues. Yet one petition struck a chord. Farmers, ravaged by year after year of poor harvests and monopolistic price gouging, demanded relief and greater representation. Elizabeth listened, her fingers interlaced atop the marble dais, her eyes probing. She granted a modest repeal of a controversial wool export patent and promised a royal commission to examine agrarian distress. The Commons, pleased by the Queen's benevolent judgment, dispersed with cautious hope. It was a moment of rare transparency, an aging monarch acknowledging her subjects' suffering. But subtle reminders of her authority lingered. Before adjourning, she requested that the House furnish her with the fairest copies of their chronicles, so she might review the annals of my realm. In that request lay both nostalgia and a veiled injunction. Elizabeth remained the sovereign, author of England's story, past, present and, she hoped, for a little while longer yet. The Deathbed Council, Succession in Shadows. Spring of 1603 saw Elizabeth's health ebb like a waning tide. Intermittent fevers, bouts of ague, and those familiar pangs of gout reminded everyone that no crown could shield its wearer from the ravages of time. On March 20th, she convened a final council within her private bedchamber, summoning Robert Cecil, Lord Salisbury, the Bishop of London, and a handful of trusted courtiers. There, in a chamber scented with lavender and the faint tang of medicinal unguents, Elizabeth spoke with unwavering clarity. She reaffirmed her secret warrant naming James VI of Scotland as her successor, on condition that he maintain the Church of England's settlement and respect her Privy Council's continuity. Despite having quashed similar warrants in moments of painful hesitation, this time her hand was steady. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of a nation's future. "Remember," she told Cecil, "I die a sovereign. Let no man treat the king as though he were less than a free prince. Preserve my laws, my people, my church." Those final directives revealed an Elizabeth still sizing up power, even as it slipped like grains of sand through her fingers. Non Gavda. The final act, a sovereign swan song. On the night of March 23rd, 1603, the Queen's strength faltered. Physicians, throwing aside protocol, hovered at her bedside, testing her pulse and prescribing cordials laced with cinnamon and rosewater. Courtiers, many of whom had danced in her favor and flamed in her wrath, gathered outside the door, silent as gravestones. As the clock chimed midnight, Elizabeth, her red gold hair loosened, her hands clasped over a small silver crucifix, recited the 91st Psalm. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, he shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Those present described her voice as clear, calm, regal, an echo of the Queen who had once rallied troops at Tilbury. At 9 a.m., on March 24th, with courtiers and ladies-in-waiting gripped by a hushed dread, Elizabeth Tudor slipped away. The flickering candles in her chamber guttered but did not extinguish, as though honoring the Queen's final desire, that the light of her reign endure, even as she passed beyond it. Ain Davida. Morning and the morning after, Whitehall fell under a veil of black. Bells tolled in Parliament Square, not pealing joyously, but tolling mournfully. Official proclamations ordered citizens to don mourning attire and refrain from public entertainments for a stipulated fortnight. Londoners, ever given to spectacle, complied with solemn processions, widows garbed in sable, children clutching simple floral garlands, and minstrels playing dirges in narrow alleys. Meanwhile, James VI of Scotland, now James I of England, rode south with careful discretion. He paused at the English border to admonish his Scottish retinue. "Respect these lands, their laws, and the precedent of our late mother." His arrival at Whitehall was met with guarded ceremony. He knelt before Elizabeth's coffin, kissed the sculpted effigy on her catafalque, then rose to receive the mantle of two kingdoms. Courtiers shifted allegiances in silent calculation. Factions that once vied under Elizabeth's sparkling ruffs now jockeyed for favor in James's more relaxed court, where witches' trials and union debates replaced the Queen's tight choreography of power. Yet none could deny the template she'd laid, a sovereign's image meticulously curated, a government run by robed bureaucrats rather than haughty nobles, and a national identity fashioned through pageantry and patronage alike. Aravda, iconography and immortality. In death, Elizabeth's visage took on near-mythic proportions. Masquerade troupes donned her fluted collars and red wigs. Pamphleteers printed broadsides praising her as the Phoenix of England, reborn in memory if not in flesh. Artists painted allegorical scenes, Elizabeth ascending to heaven, attended by cherubs bearing scrolls inscribed Vivat Regina, long live the Queen, even on the very scroll that read De mortui nil nisi bonum. Her funeral, held on April 28th, was a spectacle worthy of the Queen herself. A hearse shaped like a coffin-carrying ship, a nod to the Armada victory, bore her body through the streets. Black liveried mourners cast handfuls of rose petals onto the procession. Commoners lined the route, weeping into handkerchiefs. At Westminster Abbey, beneath the towering fan vaulting, Elizabeth's alabaster monument rose, her carved effigy crowned, robed, and holding an orb and scepter, as if still surveying her realm. Yearam, the ghost in the Tudor machine. Long after the last jewel was stripped from her coffin and the vault sealed, Elizabeth's presence haunted the English imagination. Biographers spun tales of her passion for secrets, midnight councils, coded letters, and hidden staircases within Whitehall's walls. Poets invoked her spirit as a testament to feminine prowess. Kings have castles, but she built an empire of hearts, quipped one waggish versifier. Ghost stories clung to former palace sites. Workmen renovating the old non-such foundations claimed to hear distant lute music and the faint rustle of silk. Actors at the Globe whispered that, on certain moonlit nights, a disembodied voice would correct a flawed line of Shakespeare's. Was it Elizabeth herself still ensuring the perfection of her cultural legacy? Irtavda. Why her story still commands the stage for centuries on. Elizabeth's life reads like epic theater. High intrigue, foreign wars, scientific wonder, and an unshakable self-brand. She pioneered modern public relations, crafting a persona that blended mystique, approachability, and unassailable dignity. She balanced cruelty with clemency, rage with rhetoric, and theater with theology. In an age of relentless media churn, we still study her maneuvers, image rollouts, crisis management, and the strategic use of ambiguity. Every modern queen, president, or celebrity brand manager owes her a nod. From photo ops staged down to the last hashtag to leaders leaning into persona politics, the Elizabethan playbook endures. And on desks around the world, children still open history textbooks to her portrait, her eyes daring them to dream bigger than their birthright might suggest. Divyadi, the final epilogue, a legacy carved in stone and flesh. Elizabeth I's reign reshaped England from a fractured realm into a nascent world power. She survived plagues that would have crushed lesser spirits, defied invasions on land and sea, and danced between faiths without surrendering her conscience. Her life was a relentless performance of sovereignty, one in which every gesture, down to the angle of her hand, was choreographed for maximum effect. When we recall her today, we recall not just the sequence of events, armada, alchemy, parliament, but the iron will and theatrical flair that made her rule unforgettable. The scarlet dawn of her hair, the glint of her jewels, the stealth of her agents, and the poetry of her speeches united to forge an icon whose shadow still stretches across history's stage. And so, as the final curtain falls on our story, we salute the ultimate badass queen, the woman who turned survival into spectacle, danger into drama, and history into her personal triumph. Her echo remains in every grand procession, every royal proclamation, and every heart that dares to don the crown of audacity. Proof that in the theater of power, Elizabeth Tudor remains its greatest leading lady. Picture a woman so captivating that kings bent the knee, a queen so controversial she tore England in half, and a lover so reckless he'd risk everything for her smile. That's Anne Boleyn's story, the ultimate power play in Tudor drama. Buckle up for poison plots, royal meltdowns, and a head-chopping finale you can't unsee. Anne Boleyn arrived at Henry I's court around 1522, a bright-eyed teenager fresh from the glittering halls of France, where she'd mastered French fashion, flirty courtly gestures, and the art of never looking like she was trying too hard. Back in England, though, she was merely Lady Anne, daughter of a rising noble family, skilled in language and music, admired but safely out of reach of the king's wandering eye. That, however, was about to change. By 1526, Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon had grown stale. No male heir, endless papal wrangling, and Catherine's well-meaning insistence that divorce was a sin left the king desperate for excitement and offspring. Enter Anne, who refused to play the usual demure noblewoman. She flirted with Henry's interest, yet coyly danced just out of his grasp. When he offered to make her his mistress, she famously replied she would prefer marriage, by which means you would be brought to heaven, and I, even I, should be Queen of England. Cue Henry's jaw hitting the polished marble of Whitehall. What followed was 7 years of courtly brinksmanship. Henry wooed Anne with dazzling jewels, secret letters dripping with promises, and trips to the hunting grounds that resembled medieval rom-coms. Anne, for her part, demanded a ring with a bee carved in gold, a symbol of her ambitions and Henry's devotion. They exchanged notes under the noses of bishops and ladies-in-waiting, each line laced with equal parts hope and hubris. Yet love alone couldn't navigate the treacherous waters of 16th century statecraft. Henry needed a male heir, and by extension, a wedding to a queen who could deliver one. Papal dispensations, theologians, and legions of clerics debated whether the king's first marriage was valid. Catherine's camp pointed to Leviticus: "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing." Anne's allies argued that blameless Henry was forced into sin by an illicit marriage. Theologians traveled from Rome to London, scribbling arguments by candlelight, while Anne brushed aside doubts. Let the priests talk. God favors bold queens. In June 1533, the die was cast. Henry's marriage to Catherine was declared null and void, and he wed Anne in a private ceremony at the royal chapel in Greenwich. Overnight, Anne transformed from a noble's daughter into Queen Consort of England. The coronation procession dazzled, banners embroidered with the letter B, torchlight gleaming on her ruby crown, and the echo of heralds proclaiming, "Long live Queen Anne." The streets overflowed with commoners gawking and gossiping, some enthralled, others muttering that the king's new witch-wife had bewitched him. Anne's crowning moment, however, was clouded by her inability to produce a male heir immediately. In September 1533, she delivered her first child, Elizabeth. The birth was both triumph and trial, joy for a royal baby, disappointment for the king. Pious Elizabeth was christened with pomp, yet Henry's hopes for a son flared brighter than church candles, and his patience with Anne dimmed accordingly. Courtiers whispered of Anne's presumed miscarriage of sons, attributing her failure to supernatural barriers, or, more scandalously, witchcraft. Meanwhile, Anne wielded influence like a general on the battlefield. She championed reformers, Thomas Cranmer and his circle, who sought to prune papal power from English life. Under Anne's aegis, Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy in 1534, crowning Henry supreme head of the Church of England. With that stroke, Anne not only secured her own position, but changed the religious landscape forever, divorcing England from Rome. Her iron-tipped pen reshaped faith and governance, her name inscribed in statutes that would echo through centuries of Protestant and Catholic conflicts. Yet power breeds enemies faster than plague begets misery. Anne's rise threatened Catherine's faction and conservative bishops. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, once the most powerful man in England, had fallen from grace. Sir Thomas More retired in protest, and Anne's own family, aided by her brother George, grew so arrogantly influential that courtiers scornfully dubbed them the Boleyn faction. Rival nobles plotted in candlelit corridors, sharing poisoned gossip like cocktails. The Queen's French confessor was accused of heresy, her lady-in-waiting suspected of secret liaisons, and every glance between Anne and Henry dissected for signs of scandal. By 1535, Henry's infatuation curdled into irritation. His marriage to Anne had unleashed the English Reformation, emboldened her family, and left him no closer to a son. Rumor reached Anne's ears that Henry had a new interest, a porcelain-skinned lady named Jane Seymour, kinder, more pliant, and blessed with that elusive quality, fertility. Anne's retinue tightened around her. Her brothers, Thomas and George, clashed with rival courtiers, and every court masque, poem, and pageant took on the tense undertones of a soap opera finale. Then came the arrests. In May 1536, Anne's brother George was seized for alleged treason and incest, a charge so grotesque it stunned the kingdom. Her other brother, Thomas, and several courtiers faced similar accusations. Lastly, Anne herself was accused of adultery with 5 men, treasonous incest with her brother George, and plotting the king's death. The charges read like a macabre tavern tale: late-night rendezvous in the tower, secret letters bound with black silk, and midnight rituals under the pale moon. Anne's trial in May 1536 was a spectacle of Tudor brutality. A jury of noblemen, many indebted to the crown, convened in Westminster Hall. Witnesses, ensnared by threats, delivered lurid testimonies: a kiss in a garden, a stolen glove passed under a table, a whispered word in a chapel. The Queen's defense, her eloquence, her dignity, fell on deaf ears. Within hours, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. On May 17, 1536, Anne Boleyn, the queen who had reshaped religion, challenged papal authority and flouted the era's gender norms, was led to the Tower Green. Dressed in a red petticoat symbolizing martyrdom, she delivered a final prayer. I commend my soul into the hands of God that gave it, and my body to the earth, to be buried in Christian burial. Her composure unsettled onlookers, a queen going to her doom with grace and courage. The next morning, an expert swordsman from Calais, brought in by Henry for his promise of a swift death, raised his gleaming blade. With a single clean stroke, Anne's head was severed. The crowd gasped, some swooned. The woman who had dared to be queen, the mother of Elizabeth I, the catalyst of England's religious revolution, she was gone. But Anne's story did not end on that scaffold. Her daughter Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, becoming the virgin queen whose reign glowed golden. Elizabeth's policies honored her mother's legacy, a Protestant church independent of Rome, a monarchy harnessing spectacle and ceremony, and a queen's power unshackled by marriage. Scholars later dubbed Anne Boleyn the queen who changed England forever, and with good reason. In this first chapter of Anne's saga, we've witnessed her rise from a witty courtier to a queen whose ambition sparked a revolution. We've seen love twist into treachery, courtly intrigue morph into deadly conspiracy, and a woman's fate hinge on her success in bearing a son. Yet Anne's impact transcended her tragic end. She shattered barriers, challenged authority, and altered the very soul of a nation. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore Anne's early life in France, her family's rise and fall, the clandestine letters that ignited a scandal, and the unfurling of England's break with Rome, complete with more Tudor absurdities, gut-wrenching, betrayals, and the ruthless calculus of power. Part 2. From French halls to English intrigue, family fortunes, secret scribbles, and the road to reformation. Anne's story truly begins before Henry ever laid eyes on her, back in the glittering courts of France, where she learned the art of power. Under gilded ceilings, born around 1501 as the second daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn and Lady Elizabeth Howard, Anne spent her adolescence at the Maison de Chem and the royal court of Margaret of Austria. Here, she mastered French, the language of diplomacy and betrayal, danced in silks that whispered secrets with every step, and watched ladies-in-waiting wheedle influence like serpents in pearls. While her sister Mary soaked up compliments for her classical beauty, Anne cultivated sharper skills, witty repartee, a talent for music, and that rare ability to seem both innocent and inscrutable. She sketched patron saints on vellum and wrote poems so clever they doubled as covert political critiques. At 14, she returned to England with a suitcase brimming with embroidered handkerchiefs and a mind buzzing with continental schemes. Her father, seizing on her polish, paraded her among courtiers as Tudor ambition incarnate. Behold my daughter, half French, wholly fearless. Back in London, the Boleyns ramped up their ascent. Thomas Boleyn negotiated marriages and estates with the finesse of a carnival barker, while Anne's uncle, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, tipped the scales of patronage in her favor. Suddenly, Anne's family was everywhere, at tournaments, banquets, and private councils. Courtiers whispered that Boleyn gold flowed like champagne, lubricating alliances faster than a court masks revelers. Yet even as her family climbed, Anne kept a careful distance. She wore simple gowns, black velvet trimmed with pearls, to signal modesty, then surprised onlookers with flashes of courtly brilliance. A Latin couplet delivered like a shuriken, a lute solo that silenced chattering lords, a fleeting look that unsettled jealous mistresses. They muttered, "She's clever enough to be dangerous." And dangerous she was, because every noble craved her friendship, every diplomat sought her counsel, and every bishop feared her influence. Then came the letters. Not love letters, though those arrived later, but clandestine dispatches between Thomas Cromwell and leading reformers in Germany. Anne, intrigued by Lutheran pamphlets, built a secret library in her London townhouse, where texts on sola scriptura and clerical marriage lay hidden beneath silk pillows. She exchanged encoded missives with William Tyndale's circle, urging them to smuggle Bibles in English into the country. By lighting that spark, she unwittingly stoked the fuse that would detonate Rome's control. Meanwhile, Henry's obsession grew. Word of Anne's French refinement reached Whitehall like wildfire. Her laughter, her wit, her refusal to bow her head too low. Henry pursued her with the single-minded fervor of a man convinced his destiny hinged on her. He commissioned tunes to serenade her, sent his fool to court her favor with dubious rhymes about crowns and cleavage, and even attempted to catch her hand in his glove during jousts, an act so brazen it sent court ladies into spasms of scandalized delight. As Henry's infatuation tipped into desperation, Anne stiffened. She enjoyed the chase, but marriage required more than a royal decree. To secure her position, Thomas Boleyn negotiated with the papal legate, wrangled cardinals in Rome, and even offered to fund a new chapel in St. Peter's. If only the Pope would annul Henry's first marriage. Anne's own negotiations were equally shrewd. She demanded a substantial jointure, the elevation of her brother George to Viscount, and public acknowledgement of her dignity, no lesser title than Her Majesty. The pivotal moment came in early 1533, when Henry bypassed Parliament and secretly married Anne before dawn, an act so audacious it flouted both canon law and common sense. The following month, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer declared Henry's marriage to Catherine void, then crowned Anne as queen at the Palace of Greenwich. Portrait artists immortalized her in heavy brocade, the coronation crown slipping perilously low as though she wore the weight of both crown and controversy. Anne's triumph, however, revealed a kingdom fractured. Catherine's staunch defenders, among them Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, resigned in protest and preached loyalty to Rome from pulpits. In southern towns, Catholic processions turned into mini-riots, burning effigies of the Boleyns, hissing witch at passing heralds. Meanwhile, reformist preachers seized pulpits in Norwich and London, hailing Anne as God's chosen instrument to free England from papal chains. Amid this religious tempest, Anne spearheaded Parliament's most radical session to date. She personally consulted with MPs in Westminster Hall, treating their debates as strategy sessions. Remember, she is said to have quipped, "We're not debating theology for fun, we're changing history." Under her gaze, laws were passed, clerical appeals to Rome banned, papal taxation barred, and Henry proclaimed supreme head of the Church of England. England's break with Rome was complete, and it bore Anne's fingerprints as clearly as her emblematic falcon hovering over every statute book. Yet for all her legislative brilliance, Anne's personal fortunes wavered. The pregnancy that should have cemented her legacy faltered. First a boy, then a girl, then another miscarriage. Each loss chipped away at Henry's devotion. His affections cooled with the same ferocity they'd flared, shifting toward the gentle grace of Jane Seymour, whose blousy hair and down-to-earth faith presented an appealing contrast to Anne's razor-sharp intellect. Sensing the shift, Anne's enemies struck. Bishop Stephen Gardiner resurrected charges of heresy against her French confessor. Conservative courtiers accused the Boleyns of enriching themselves through ecclesiastical spoils. George and Thomas Boleyn were labeled traitors in hushed accusations, their assets quietly sequestered. Anne's own behavior, her sharp tongue, her disdain for outdated ritual, was recast as insolence and intolerance. Then came the Whisper campaign. Anne had conversed with demons, consorted with Hades, and planned to poison the king's breakfast. Patriotic pamphlets described her as a Jezebel leading England into damnation. Catholics painted her as a heretic whose execution would appease heaven. The queen's closest ladies-in-waiting were interrogated under threat of torture, their forced testimonies woven into a tapestry of moral depravity. By the time Anne sat in the tower, clutching the last letters of her beloved, the verdict had long been sealed. But her true crime was never adultery or incest, nor even treason. Her only unpardonable sin was changing the rules of the game. She had dared to reshape church and state, to outmaneuver ancient institutions, and to demand equal standing among kings and cardinals. In Tudor England, that was a hanging offense. As the scaffold rose on Tower Green, Anne summoned her courage one final time. She prayed for her soul, confessed no affinity with the devil, and proclaimed her love for her God and country. With the guillotine's swift sword stroke that ended her life, England lost a queen, but gained a martyr whose legacy would ripple through Tudor courts and Protestant synods alike. In this chapter, we've traced Anne's journey from cultured exile to queenly power broker, witnessing her family's meteoric rise and brutal fall, the clandestine exchanges that ignited a reformation, and the ruthless political calculus that sealed her fate. Part 3 awaits. We'll journey into Anne's final days, dissect the trials that condemned her, and unpack the astonishing ways her death reshaped a nation, complete with more Tudor absurdities, whispered conspiracies, and the echo of a queen's laughter long after her avatar lay beneath the tower's stones. Part 3: Trial by Conspiracy, Imprisonment, Interrogation, and the Queen's Final Act. The bells of London tolled a grim cadence in May of 1536 as Anne Boleyn found herself at the bitter end of a drama she once orchestrated. No more sumptuous feasts or whispered alliances. Her world had shrunk to stone walls, shadowed corridors, and the ever-present specter of betrayal. In this installment, we witness Anne's descent from regal heights into the Tower's cold embrace, the brutal theater of her trial, and the steely grace with which she faced the guillotine. First, arrest at Greenwich, from courtly splendor to midnight chains. First, on the evening of May 2nd, 1536, Anne dined in the opulent privy chamber at Greenwich Palace, surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting and the soft glow of tallow candles. Laughter echoed against gilded paneling as the Queen sampled spiced wine and discussed new masked designs. Outside, horse hooves thundered on cobblestones, heralding the arrival of court executioners, linesmen in black cloaks, their faces obscured by hoods. A sudden hush fell. Sir William Kingston, Constable of the Tower, entered unannounced, flanked by guards. Anne's Lady Mary Shelton trembled, the Queen's own eyes narrowed. "Your Majesty," Kingston intoned, "by the King's command you are under arrest for high treason." Anne rose, setting down her cup. Courtiers gasped, some fled, others collapsed. The constable produced a warrant, soon known as the delinquent's writ, accusing her of adultery, incest, and plotting to poison the king's broth. She allowed herself a single measured curtsy. "I await the king's justice," she replied, voice calm as a storm's eye. Within moments, Anne was bound in silk ropes, no ruff ironed for the Queen, and escorted through the courtyard. Commoners pressed against palace railings, bewildered to see their sovereign trussed like a common felon. Second prison in the Tower, a Queen's solitary vigil. Anne arrived at the Tower of London under a moonlit sky. The Traitor's Gate splashed her reflection in the murky waters of the moat as she passed through its arch, the heavy door closing with a metallic groan. Inside, her lodgings were austere. A single chamber furnished with straw mattress, wooden bucket, and a narrow window barred against the world. Gone were the tapestries and perfumed fabrics, only damp stone and the echo of distant footsteps. Yet Anne was nothing if not resourceful. She commanded her ladies to smuggle in small comforts, embroidered handkerchiefs, embroidered psalter, and a fragment of perfumed ribbon from her favorite kirtle. By candlelight, she composed letters to King Henry, pleading her innocence and appealing to his old ardor. "My sovereign lord," she wrote, "I protest my soul untouched by the crimes you accuse. Let not false tongues condemn your truest wife." She also met with Sir William Kingston, who, despite his duty, showed a flicker of sympathy. He granted her a small mazer of wine each evening and discreetly whispered that evidence was scant. No witnesses had seen her in the king's bed with any man but himself. But the wheels of court politics ground on, an inveterate engine of cruelty that brooked no mercy for a queen who had dared to change the rules. Moondrama, the fabrication of guilt, coercion, confessions, and public spectacle. The prosecution's case hinged on whispers and letters, the Tudor equivalent of viral gossip. Key among the accused was Mark Smeaton, a lowly court musician whose scandalous confession became the trial's linchpin. Under duress and probable torture, Smeaton claimed he had satisfied the Queen's desires in a dim corner of Greenwich, his fingers entangled in silk. His overheated testimony described secret rendezvous and passionate embraces that Henry himself found implausible. Yet the horror of adultery against a queen stirred Londoners' blood. Anne's own brother, George Boleyn, was charged with incest, a nauseating allegation that branded the Boleyn name with eternal disgrace. Smeaton's statement, bolstered by coerced depositions from Anne's ladies-in-waiting, painted a lurid tableau: midnight assignations in the Tower's postern, clandestine letters bound with black ribbon, and whispered promises of murder against the king. The evidence was, at best, circumstantial, at worst fabricated by ambitious jurists keen to curry favor with a capricious monarch. Word of the alleged conspiracy spread through taverns and marketplaces. Ballad singers composed scurrilous ditties. O fair Anne Boleyn, with her serpentine grin, traded her honor for a stab in the king's skin. Pamphlets circulated, illustrated with grotesque woodcuts showing the queen clutching daggers in one hand and a crown in the other. These broadsides incited public fury, turning Anne's prior popularity into a mob frenzy demanding her execution. Nangavada. Trial in Westminster Hall, a Crown's tribunal. On May 15, 1536, Anne was led in shackles to Westminster Hall, the largest and most august courtroom in England. The hall's timbered roof loomed overhead, flanked by stained glass windows that filtered in a cold gray light. A jury of peers, dukes, earls, and bishops handpicked by the king sat on a raised dais, their expressions masked in solemnity. The charges were read aloud: high treason through adultery, incest with her brother encompassing the king's death. Anne, dressed in mourning black and wearing no jewelry, climbed the witness stand with regal dignity. When asked if she had committed adultery, her voice rang out, "My lord judges, I have lived honorably and have never known such offenses. Though false tongues may accuse, truth remains steadfast." She refused to implicate her brother, answering "not so" when asked if George had engaged in incestuous acts. Her composure silenced gasps in the gallery. Even some jurors exchanged uneasy glances, but jury verdicts in Tudor courts often served as mere rubber stamps for royal will. Within hours, the foreman delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. Gasps of shock rippled through the hushed crowd, followed by a surge of relief among the prosecution. Anne bowed her head, lips pressed in a firm line, as ropes were anew fastened to her wrists. Eindavda, the last night, quiet resolve in the queen's chamber. Anne returned to the tower for her final night. Guards ensured no undue comforts. Her straw pallet was removed, replaced by a simple mattress on the floor, yet she remained unbroken. Her ladies knelt beside her, weeping softly, smoothing her hair and dressing her in a man's gown to prevent an undignified scattering of hair upon the block. She wrote one last letter to the king, touching on the pain of separation, but avoiding reproach. "I die your true wife, though fate denies my heart the balm of your presence," she penned. She then took communion in private, receiving the host and chalice from a priest who whispered absolution into her ear. As dawn approached, Anne asked for music. A plaintive lute solo she hummed softly. The notes drifted through the tower's corridors, a haunting lullaby for England's fallen queen. 6. Execution on Tower Green, the final performance, at precisely 8 a.m. On May 19th, Anne Boleyn was escorted across the tower's courtyard to the scaffold erected on Tower Green. The morning mist clung to the grass like mournful ghosts. A small crowd of court officials and a handful of invited spectators, carefully chosen to witness but not hinder, stood behind a rope barrier. Anne ascended the scaffold steps with measured steps, her gown pooling gracefully. She addressed the assembled witnesses. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore pardon me that I now speak anything which may not be consonant to my profession, or to the dignity of the crown of England." She proclaimed her forgiveness for her accusers and commended her soul to God. Turning to the executioner, an expert swordsman from Calais, she removed her sleeves and placed her head upon the block. According to eyewitnesses, she knelt, crossed her arms, and whispered a final prayer. The blade fell in a single, swift arc, and her head separated from her body with shocking precision. The executioner displayed Anne's head to the witnesses, then placed it on a pike above the tower's gates, a grim reminder of royal justice. But those in the crowd noted a curious detail, an enigmatic, near-serene expression on her lifeless face, as though Anne possessed a secret joy unknown to her persecutors. Yerom. Immediate aftermath, mourning, memory in the Queen's vanished presence. News of Anne's execution rippled through England. Some wept for the unjust fall of a queen who had done much to shape the nation. Others cheered the downfall of a supposed witch. In Paris, King Francis I reportedly ordered church bells to toll in mourning, a diplomatic jab at Henry's cruelty. Within days, Anne's children, Elizabeth and the infant son who had died, were gathered by court guardians and removed from public view. Henry VIII, afflicted by remorse or political necessity, or perhaps a combination of both, disposed of Anne's name from court records. Her portraits were defaced, her statues removed. But the reforms she championed, most notably the Act of Supremacy and the break with Rome, remained intact. Parliament confirmed the legality of the new church, ensuring Anne's legacy would outlive her memory. Etavde, Legacy and Resurrection, Anne's shadow over Elizabethan England. Though buried in an unmarked grave within the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, Anne Boleyn refused to fade into obscurity. Her daughter Elizabeth, crowned queen in 1558, tapped into her mother's resilient spirit. Elizabeth's reign, steeped in pageantry, religious moderation, and the same flair for image-making, echoed Anne's blueprint for power. Courtiers whispered that Elizabeth's famous Gloriana persona owed much to the martyr mother who taught her that a crown could be both a blessing and a weapon. In the decades that followed, writers and historians retold Anne's story with varying degrees of sympathy and scandal. Playwrights cast her as tragic heroine or scheming temptress. Chroniclers alternately lamented her fate or condemned her ambition. Yet beneath every version lay an undeniable truth. Anne Boleyn irrevocably altered England's trajectory. Her marriage to Henry unlocked the nation from papal chains. Her tragic fall cautioned future queens against overreaching. Her indomitable will inspired generations of women to seize power, even at great personal cost. Divyati, the irony of infamy. How death cemented Anne's power. In death, Anne's power paradoxically grew. The abrupt violence of her execution, coupled with the scandalous charges, created a legend that no royal censure could erase. Pilgrims visited the Tower's chapel to pray at her tomb. Whispers claimed her ghost wandered the corridors, searching for vindication. Poets penned elegies, the Broken Rose of London, the Martyr Queen, ensuring her name remained in print and song. By the time Elizabeth I sat upon the throne, Anne's story had become part of the Tudor mythos, a cautionary tale of ambition, a testament to female agency, and a cornerstone of England's Protestant identity. The very mechanisms that executed her, parliamentary supremacy, sovereign headship of the church, became the pillars of the realm she had helped forge. With this chapter's close, Anne Boleyn's life transforms from a sequence of political maneuvers into an enduring legend. Part 4 awaits. We will explore the ripple effects of Anne's downfall on Europe's courts, the long-term religious tumult she ignited, and the indelible mark she left on the concept of queenship itself, proof that sometimes the most tragic endings spark the greatest beginnings. Part 4 Ripples of a Fallen Queen, Europe in Turmoil, Tudor Aftershocks, and the Ghost of Anne Boleyn I. Continental shockwaves, diplomatic earthquakes, and royal outrage. News of Anne Boleyn's execution didn't stay within England's borders. It detonated across Europe like a misfired cannon. In Paris, French ambassadors penned dispatches dripping with scorn. Henry's caprice knows no bounds. Today a queen, tomorrow a corpse. Catherine de' Medici's court staged mock funerals to lampoon Henry's cruelty, complete with effigies of the Tudor, tyrant turned puppet. Meanwhile, in the Papal States, Pope Paul III gloated that divine justice had triumphed over heresy, oblivious to the fact that England's break with Rome was now irreversible. Even distant courts felt tremors. In the Habsburg realms, Charles V admonished envoys to treat the English schism as an act of rebellion, while negotiating alliances against Protestant princes in Germany. The Holy Roman Empire's diet echoed with debates on whether regicide or spousal execution qualified as legitimate statecraft. Religious zealots on both sides invoked Anne's story. Catholics lamented the saintly martyr felled by heretic zeal. Protestants hailed her as the bold catalyst of reform. In backroom gatherings, clerics argued that Anne's fall proved the necessity of shared authority between crown and clergy, an idea that would feed into continental church councils for decades. Dusra, religious upheaval, seeds of Protestant England. Within England, the institutional foundations Anne helped lay began to bear chaotic fruit. The Act of Supremacy, passed under her aegis, empowered Henry VIII to confiscate monastic lands, sparking a wave of dissolutions. Abbeys, once opulent centers of charity and learning, were stripped, their libraries burned or sold, their monks evicted. The sudden influx of wealth into noble hands broke centuries of land tenure, creating a speculative frenzy. Barons snapped up former church estates, turned cloisters into hunting lodges, and opened private chapels where they preached reformist sermons. This upheaval ignited popular unrest. Rebels in Yorkshire and Cornwall, spurred by nostalgia for Catholic rights and anger at rising taxes, took to the fields armed with pitchforks, demanding the return of their blessed sisters and holy bells. The Crown's ruthless suppression of the Chua Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536-37 revealed the depths of national division. Villagers hanged in chains, banners torn, and entire communities punished for daring to question royal supremacy. Simultaneously, Protestant exiles fled to the continent, carrying with them English translations of the Bible and tracts mocking papal authority. They found refuge in Frankfurt, Geneva, and Strasbourg, where Calvinists and Lutherans debated the precise shade of English Puritanism. These émigrés formed the nucleus of a future Puritan diaspora that would return to England under Elizabeth, and later across the Atlantic to Plymouth Rock. Anne's death thus became the tragic prologue to a long, bloody sequel of religious wars that would engulf Europe. 3. The Tudor court's reinvention. From Boleyn to Seymour. Back at Whitehall, courtly life performed a swift pivot. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, entered the scene with the soft grace of a meadow breeze, a calculated antidote to Anne's sharp wit. Seymour's gentle piety and promise of sons soothed the king's wounded vanity, and in October 1537 she delivered Edward, the long-awaited male heir. The court feted mother and child. Pageants, mintings of gold coins bearing Jane's effigy, and a lavish tournament where the victor offered his lance to the infant prince. Yet Jane's triumph was short-lived. She died of postnatal complications less than 2 weeks later. The palpable connection between childbirth and mortality became an unwelcome legacy of the Tudor womb. Catherine of Aragon's childlessness, Anne's miscarriages, and Jane's fatal delivery formed a tragic trilogy. Henry, now a widower thrice over, retreated into self-indulgence. Hunting, feasting, and extravagant architectural projects like Nonsuch Palace. But the echo of Anne's reforms could not be silenced. Her daughter Elizabeth, legitimized after Jane's death, was restored in the succession and grew up under the shadow of her mother's vanished court. Non-Gavda, cultural memory, portraits, playwrights, and public myth-making. Anne Boleyn's image became a battleground of memory. Court painters, under orders to erase courtiers bearing the Boleyn B cipher, overpainted jewels, removed falcon badges, and replaced her likeness in tapestries with allegorical figures. Yet clandestine portraits survived, a sketch in Calais, a lost masterpiece rediscovered later in a French chateau, and bits of armor bearing her coat of arms. These relics fed a quiet cult of Anne devotion. Brave antiquarians in the 17th century sniffed out Boleyn documents, scribbling memoirs that painted her as a proto-feminist martyr. Playwrights seized on the drama. Nicholas Rowe's 1705 tragedy, The Tragedy of Jane Shore, alluded to Anne's spirit, and later dramatists cast her as both victim and villain. Shakespeare never wrote an Anne Boleyn play, but his histories, Richard III's usurped crown, Henry VI's martial glory, echoed the themes of sovereignty contested and legitimacy earned. In the 19th century, Gothic novelists resurrected Anne as a spectral protagonist, wandering the tower in spectral ruffs, her hollow wail carried on east wind gales. Eindaude, ghosts and legends, the tower's haunting heiress. The Tower of London became Anne's eternal stage. Guards swore they heard her footsteps on the shadowed ramparts, the click of her beloved falcon hood ghosting through drained dungeons. Visitors reported chilling drafts in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne's unmarked grave lay beneath herringbone bricks. Ghost tours spun tales of her lament. "Remember me," her voice sighed behind locked doors, "for I changed the realm and lost my head." Some locals claim that on May 19th, the anniversary of her death, the air grew heavy with the scent of violets, Anne's favorite flower, and that a lone falcon would hover over the tower's towers. 6. Elizabeth's reclamation, mother's echo in the Virgin Queen. When Elizabeth I ascended in 1558, she inherited a kingdom still reverberating from Anne's revolution. Elizabeth's savvy blended her mother's diplomatic flair with her father's political pragmatism. She revived Anne's falcon emblem subtly, on a fan here, embroidered on a corset there, reminding courtiers of her mother's lineage without overtly embracing the scandal. Elizabeth's religious settlement mirrored Anne's via media, affirming royal supremacy, tolerating moderate Catholics, and preaching unity over extremism. Under Elizabeth, the arts flourished. Shakespeare's Globe, Marlowe's tragedies, Spenser's epic poetry, an echo of Anne's patronage of humanist learning and continental connections. Elizabeth's most pointed homage appeared in portraits where she held a book of psalms, an intimate nod to Anne's secret library, and where the faint shadow of a falcon appeared carved into a stone ledge behind her throne. Scholars argue that Elizabeth's cult of the Virgin Queen owed as much to Anne's martyrdom as to Tudor propaganda, a woman who survived courtly storms and emerged sovereign in her own right. 7. Feminist icon or cautionary tale? Modern Anne Boleyn fast forward to our era, and Anne's legacy splits into two camps. Popular culture reimagines her as proto-feminist icon, a woman who wielded intellect over lineage, who forced a patriarchal church to its knees, and who faced death with unbroken dignity. Historical novelists like Philippa Gregory cast Anne as the bold heroine, battling treachery with pen and perfume alike. Television series depict her gown-clad defiance in close-up, her spark-lit eyes daring the camera to flinch. Yet academic historians offer a more nuanced portrait. They celebrate her role in the Reformation, but caution against hagiography. Anne was ambitious, impulsive, and at times ruthless, ordering the execution of her former allies, manipulating Parliament to serve her ends, and indulging a factionalism that fueled her downfall. Her life reminds us that power, especially for women in patriarchal societies, is both a weapon and a cage. 8. Anne's laws and lingering legacies. The legal changes Anne catalyzed endure. The concept of royal supremacy paved the way for constitutional monarchy. The precedent of annulment without papal approval underpins modern understandings of sovereign authority, and the use of parliamentary statutes to settle religious questions foreshadows today's separation of church and state debates. Even the Act of Succession, first manipulated to secure Henry's heirs, became a template for dynastic continuity long after the Tudors faded. Her influence echoes in unexpected corners: British vessels named HMS Boleyn, feminist scholars debating her role in early modern female agency, and anniversary commemorations that draw history buffs and ghost tourists alike. Each May 19th, social media buzzes with hashtags like Remember Anne and Martyr Queen, testifying to her enduring grip on popular imagination. Devyati, closing reflections. The queen who lost her head and gained an empire. Anne Boleyn's life was a compressed epic, from orphaned courtier to queenly powerhouse, from the heights of favor to the scaffold shadow. She reshaped religion, reconfigured royal power, and proved that a woman's ambition could redraw the map of Europe. Her execution remains one of history's most visceral reminders that authority and vulnerability walk hand in hand. In the end, Anne's true power transcended her death. Her daughter Elizabeth's golden reign, England's Protestant identity, and the very concept of popular sovereignty bear her indelible mark. The Tower of London still whispers her name. London streets carry her legend, and every time a historian unearths a new Boleyn letter or a novelist reimagines her plight, Anne Boleyn, queen who changed England forever, lives anew. And so our saga concludes, a testament to the fierce cost of change, the ironies of power, the ghostly endurance of a queen without a gravestone. May her story remind us that sometimes the greatest transformations arise not from heirs crowned in triumph, but from the courage to challenge the world, and the willingness to lose one's head for the cause. Imagine the night sky igniting with fiery streaks, meteors raining down like divine punctuation marks, just as a terrified New England village decided witches were to blame. Buckle up for a tale of celestial fireworks, paranoia on steroids, and a cascade of accusations that turned Salem into America's most infamous panic room. On a crisp autumn evening in October to 1692, residents of Salem Village peered upward, expecting nothing more thrilling than the usual constellations. Instead, they witnessed a meteor shower so brilliant it lit up barn rafters and cast ghostly shadows across half-frozen fields. For devout Puritans, every heavenly sign was scripture in action, messages from God or omens of the devil's mischief. And when the sky rained stars, tongues wagged faster than church bells, speculating that unholy forces had descended upon their pious community. Rewind to earlier that year, and Salem was already a tinderbox of fear. Frontier skirmishes with French allies and native tribes had produced missing neighbors and whispered rumors of diabolical alliances. Crop failures and a virulent strain of smallpox had swept through town, leaving hollowed families and a gnarled distrust of outsiders. In this fraught atmosphere, meteor showers weren't admired as natural wonders. They were interpreted as battle signals in an existential war between heaven and hell. Young girls in the village, Abigail Williams, Elizabeth Parris, Ann Putnam Jr., among others, began exhibiting strange behaviors, contorted limbs, piercing shrieks, and uncanny knowledge of private quarrels. Local doctors, constrained by the era's meager medical understanding, diagnosed possession by evil spirits. Their treatments, prayer, fasting, and occasionally brushing the afflicted with branches from a newly struck lightning tree, did little to quell the hysteria. Instead, they fueled a conviction that witches must be at work, conjuring storms and ensnaring souls. Enter Reverend Samuel Parris, whose parsonage happened to host several of the afflicted girls. Parris, ambitious yet insecure in his pulpit, seized the moment to assert spiritual authority. He preached that the meteor shower signified God's anger and that only rooting out witches, agents of the devil, could restore divine favor. His sermons escalated from gentle admonitions to fiery tirades, urging parishioners to confess and cooperate with magistrates lest their own souls be damned. By November, the Salem witchcraft case files swelled with depositions. Neighbors accused neighbors, Sarah Good, a destitute beggar, Tituba, Paris's Caribbean slave, Sarah Osborne, an elderly outcast of dubious reputation, of tormenting the girls through spectral visits and witchberry charms. These allegations, drawn from fear-stoked imaginations, carried the weight of testimony. An accused witch's familiar would appear in dreams, stealing the victim's breath or twisting her limbs. The girls corroborated one another's accounts with dramatic flair, reenacting invisible torments for rapt courtroom audiences. The magistrates, overwhelmed by the spectacle, accepted spectral evidence, claims that an accused spirit had appeared in the afflicted's vision, as legally admissible. This evidentiary leap broke with centuries of common law, which generally required physical proof or credible witnesses, but urgency trumped due process. When meteors still streaked overhead in late 1692, though far less spectacular than that first shower, villagers took it as confirmation that witches remained at large. Each new streak of light prompted fresh arrests, expanding the panic from Salem village to neighboring towns. As the trials progressed, the logic twisted into a self-fulfilling nightmare. The more witches were condemned, the more stars villagers saw, and the more confessions, often extracted under duress, fell from the accused. Fear became the prime mover, mass hypnosis of a congregation, convinced that their collective guilt summoned celestial retribution. Meanwhile, accused witches, desperate to save their heads, quite literally, named others in hopes of leniency, extending the deadly chain of indictments. By the winter of 1693, dozens had been hanged, and one pressed to death under heavy stones. The meteor shower, once a fleeting marvel, had become a background score to the witch hunts. Every flash overhead a grim reminder that a god-sized canvas still bore the devil's signature. It wasn't until Governor William Phips intervened, shocked by the number of executions and swayed by influential voices like Increase Mather, that the use of spectral evidence was rescinded. Gradually, the mania subsided, arrests ceased, and villagers tried to stitch their communities back together. In this first act of cosmic terror and communal collapse, we glimpse how a simple meteor shower, an astronomical event repeating since the dawn of time, ignited one of history's most grotesque panics. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive into the personal stories of the accused, the twisted legal maneuvers that fueled the trials, and the extraordinary aftermath that left Salem forever haunted by the stars. Part 2, Faces Behind the Flames, Accused Witches, Courtroom Theater, and the Machinery of Madness. The meteor shower may have lit the fuse, but the cannonball of Salem's panic took shape in the bodies and stories of those accused. By late 1692, the village square was less a peaceful crossroads and more a revolving door of terror. One day you were a neighbor, the next you were dragged before magistrates, shackled and accused of communing with the devil. Let's meet a few of these ill-fated souls and see how ordinary lives were distorted into grotesque caricatures of witchcraft. 1. Tituba, the Caribbean catalyst. First up is Tituba, Reverend Paris's enslaved servant from Barbados. When young Betty Paris and Abigail Williams began their fits, Paris turned to his household staff for explanations. And Tituba, steeped in Afro-Caribbean folk magic and oral storytelling, became the prime suspect. Under coercion, she confessed to dancing with the devil, describing lurid rituals in the forest, cauldrons, and spirit familiars that obeyed her every command. Tituba's confession was a watershed moment. It provided the eager girls with a sensational template, wild animals, blood rituals, and glowing orbs that they parroted in depositions. And because Tituba was both an outsider by race and status, her testimony carried a sensational exoticism. Puritans found it easier to believe in dark rites practiced by a non-English woman. After confessing, Tituba named Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as accomplices, setting off the first dominoes in Salem's witch queue. Her words, half truth and half fabrication, became the hallmarks of spectral evidence, forever entwining her legend with the trial's hysteria. Dusra, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, women on society's margins. Both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne occupied the lower rungs of Salem's social ladder. Good a homeless beggar, Osborne a quarrelsome elder, or so ran the rumors. When Tituba fingered them, neighbors readily joined in accusatory chorus. Sarah Good, forced to stand barefoot and disheveled in court, was branded a shrew with no religion, her tattered clothes proof of her wickedness. Osborne, bedridden with a chronic leg ailment, was accused of cursing her neighbors with her cane's point. Neither had the means to mount a credible defense. In the courtroom, the girls performed dramatic scenes, Sarah Good's specter twisting Abigail's arm, Osborne's phantom finger pinching Ann Putnam's neck. The magistrates, craning their ears to each shriek, scribbled accusations as though penning holy scripture. When accused, Good proclaimed her innocence. "I am a poor, harmless woman, and have not hurt these girls." But her protests fell on ears deafened by supernatural fear. She was found guilty and hanged on July 19, 1692. Osborne, deemed too infirm for execution, died in prison, a slower, crueler justice. Her final days were spent in cells with minimal bedding, subsisting on meager gruel. When her ribs cracked under the weight of her chains, she cursed the magistrates for sentencing old crones to die for chattering in corners. Her death, though not as public as Good's, chilled the conscience of some observers who whispered that Providence had spared her for greater judgment. 3. The Putnams in the power of naming Ann Putnam Jr., and her parents became infamous for their leading roles in identifying witches. The elder Putnams owned substantial land. Their daughter's fits gave them moral and legal authority in the proceedings. Anne Jr.'s outbursts were so theatrical, she'd throw herself from pews, bark like dogs, and mimic distorted faces that even hardened skeptics gawked in alarm. Each accused person who tormented her via spectral face-making saw his or her name added to a growing indictment list. Here's the ironic twist. The Putnams' neighborly land disputes intertwined with the accusations. Many who found themselves charged had previously contested property boundaries or protested Putnam harvests. By framing conflicts as witchcraft, the Putnams weaponized legal machinery to settle scores. When the telescope of paranoia focused on Reverend George Burroughs, formerly an ally, it spat forth accusations that he had blown out 3 of Anne Jr.'s candles through invisible breath. Burroughs, despite having once preached at Salem Village, was convicted and hanged on August 19, 1692. Judicial overreach, spectral evidence, and inverted reason. The engine propelling these tragedies was the acceptance of spectral evidence. The notion that a witch's specter, her ghostly double, could harm victims even if her body lay safely in jail. This concept inverted centuries of legal practice, where material proof or eyewitness testimony held sway. Suddenly, a girl's claim of seeing a neighbor's floating image in her bedroom counted as capital evidence. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin sat enthroned over clattering quills, presiding over confessions extracted under terrifying duress. In a typical session, a girl would contort in agony and point, "There!" see her hovering by the window, garbled shapes in her hand. The accused swore the vision was false. The girl screamed, "Your spirit shrinks back." Guilty verdicts followed with grim predictability. Appeals were futile. Once branded a witch, one's signature served to confirm one's guilt, and coerced signed confessions became yet more proof. 5. Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, virtue entangled in vice. Not all accused were social outcasts. Martha Corey, respected for her honest judgment, was indicted because she questioned the validity of spectral evidence in church, and thus offended the girls whose fits she said were mere theatrics. Rebecca Nurse, 71 and saintly in reputation, was accused by her own granddaughter. The community stood aghast. Could Nurse, who had raised children and healed neighbors, truly consort with demons? Their trials became moral flashpoints. When Nurse calmly stated, "I have been always a good subject and Christian," the girls simulated fits more convulsively, as though Satan himself fueled their displays. Yet public sympathy for ordered elderly Rebecca ran deep. Many jurors hesitated. However, the higher courts demanded swift verdicts, and both women were condemned. Nurse's execution on July 19th, standing resolute in a gray shawl, cemented the sense that no status, piety, or seniority could shield one from the frenzy. Aravada, the spiral of accusation, naming names to save life. As the gallows loomed, a grim calculus emerged. Confess and name names to save your head, or maintain innocence and face death. Giles Corey's death by pressing illustrated the merciless logic. Refusing to enter a plea, he was crushed under stones, repeating only "more weight" until speech failed him. His muteness denied the court a conviction, but cost his life and estate, which passed to his sons rather than the crown. Others capitulated. Mary Bradbury, sentenced to hang, begged mercy and gave the names of several persons she alleged had consorted with her spirit. This confession spared her life, though she spent a year in prison and spread further terror. Honest folk saw confession as the only lifeline, and nobody wanted to die unaccompanied at the stake. Yerom, the turning tide, skepticism, and the end of the inferno. By late 1692, the spree had peaked. Even devout Increase Mather, leading minister of Boston, questioned the justice of spectral evidence, writing, "It were better 100 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person condemned." Facing mounting voices of dissent and governor, Phippius's concern over his colony's legitimacy, the court began excluding spectral proofs. Accusations slowed, new trials stalled. Then, in January 1693, Governor Phipps pardoned the remaining accused and dissolved the special court. The fetid stench of paranoia began to lift. Families retrieved bodies from unmarked graves. Ministers preached repentance for the church's bitter error. A public fast day was declared to atone. Fasting on ice-crusted fields, villagers lamented the innocent lives snuffed out under their watch. 8. Aftershocks, healing, compensation, and lasting scars. Salem's community bore deep scars. Surviving accused witches struggled to reclaim property, but protracted lawsuits strained remaining resources. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature finally passed a bill restoring the names and reputations of those condemned and granting compensation to heirs. Yet no amount of money could erase the trauma. The memory of hanged bodies swaying from oak limbs, the sight of neighbors turned executioners, and the unforgiving gaze of superstition remained. Divide. Why this cosmic catastrophe matters today. The Salem witch trials remind us how fear distorts reality. Meteors, natural and cyclical, became divine accusations. Courtroom rituals, meant to uphold justice, devolved into mob theater. In our era of viral misinformation, Salem's lessons resonate. Spectral evidence lives on as fake news, and communities still snap judgments based on fear, not facts. As autumn meteor showers return each year, we might gaze upward in wonder rather than dread, but also remember that history's darkest nights often begin with a single flash lighting the horizon. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the pivotal figures who ended the trials the surprising scientific explanations for the possessions, and the cultural echoes of Salem in modern media, from horror films to political witch hunts. Part 3: Science, Sanctuary, and the Slow Unraveling of Hysteria. By the chill of early 1693, the frenzy that had gripped Salem was showing its first cracks. As meteor showers dwindled to routine starfalls, a new constellation of voices, ministers, magistrates, and humble congregants began to question whether the devil really danced among them or if something far more earthly had fueled the hysteria. In this installment, we chart how skepticism crept into pulpit and courtroom, how emerging medical ideas offered rational explanations for possession, and how a handful of courageous figures turned panic back into reason. First, the voice of reason, Increase Mather and the power of persuasion. Increase Mather, the venerable Harvard-educated minister and president of the local clergy, had initially supported the use of spectral evidence, but as testimonies mounted, often contradicting one another, and respected neighbors fell under suspicion, he grew uneasy. In November 1692, Mather penned a landmark pamphlet, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, admonishing that the devil could project a false specter to accuse the innocent, and that God would not allow his faithful to be wrongly condemned. His words carried weight. Mather's moral authority and reputation for piety made magistrates pause. He argued, it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. These weren't idle platitudes, they struck at the heart of the trial's methodology. When judges in Salem town, already swamped by escalating appeals, received Mather's treatise, many conceded privately that spectral proofs were too subjective to stand alone. Dusra, legal reforms, Governor Phipps and the dissolution of the witch court. Behind the scenes, Governor William Phipps faced mounting pressure from both London and Boston. Tales of mass executions and the spectacle of a colony devouring its own had reached the Crown's ear. In January 1693, Phipps issued a proclamation abolishing the special court of Oyer and Terminer that had overseen the witch trials. He replaced it with a new superior court of judicature, one that forbade spectral evidence. When indictments based solely on visions were tossed out or withdrawn, the remaining accused found themselves free or awaiting clearer proof. The pace of arrests slowed to a trickle, then halted altogether. Families who had fled into the woods in terror crept back to their homes. Woods once rumored to host secret covens returned to silent vigil under leafless trees. In cutting off the trial's lifeblood, spectral testimony, Phipps effectively starved the frenzy he had once empowered. Moonjam, medical explanations, from possession to epilepsy and ergot. While clerics debated theology and judges revised procedure, a quieter revolution took place in the medical realm. Fascinated physicians and lay healers began documenting the afflicted girl's symptoms with a clinical eye. They noted that many experienced muscle spasms, hallucinations, and terrifying visions, symptoms strikingly similar to conditions later identified as epilepsy, hysteria, and mass psychogenic illness. In the mid-20th century, Harvard mycologist Linda Caporael famously proposed the ergot theory, that rye-bred and damp Massachusetts winters could harbor claviceps purpurea, a fungus causing ergotism. Hallucinations, convulsions, and even gangrene were documented effects of ergot poisoning. Though ergotism can be fatal and its symptoms more severe than those in Salem, the theory lent a scientific lens to the events. Perhaps the devil's touch was merely a spore-driven malady. Even if ergot doesn't fully explain every fit, it underscores how environmental factors, and the absence of germ theory, allowed natural phenomena to masquerade as supernatural assaults. As townsfolk recovered their composure, some quietly wondered if spiritual warfare had been little more than communal contagion amid harsh living conditions. Nangavada, personal reckonings, confessions of guilt and public atonement. In the months following the trial's end, several of the original accusers experienced profound remorse. Anne Putnam Jr., who had led many fits, later publicly apologized. In 1706, long after the hangings, she stood before the congregation at Salem village and read a heartfelt confession. I desire an acknowledgement of my great error, and that I may live to God's glory all the days of my life. I offer my sorrow for the innocent blood I helped spill. Her repentance resonated with survivors and descendants alike, offering a rare glimpse into the emotional aftermath of mass hysteria. Families of victims, like Rebecca Nurse's kin, demanded formal restitution. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Witchcraft Victims Restitution Act, restoring forfeited estates and granting financial compensation to heirs. While the sums could never erase trauma, they symbolized an official admission that grave injustices had been done. Eindavde, cultural echoes, from Cotton Mather's sermons to Arthur Miller's stage. Salem's witch trials echoed in sermons, diaries, and pamphlets for generations. Cotton Mather, Increase's son, wrote Wonders of the Invisible World, 1693, a vivid but conflicted account defending some prosecutions while lamenting excesses. His work preserved the trial's details even as he wrestled with their morality. 2.5 centuries later, playwright Arthur Miller harnessed Salem's legacy to critique the McCarthy-era witch hunts in the U.S. Senate. The Crucible, 1953, drew direct parallels between Puritan paranoia and Cold War fears, recasting Abigail Williams as a skillful manipulator and John Proctor as the flawed everyman resisting conformity. By dramatizing Salem's anguish, Miller ensured that the trials remained a cautionary fable against ideological zealotry and persecution. Aravade, sites of memory, the witch house, the Gallows Hill myth, and modern pilgrimage. Today, Salem embraces its dark chapter as a cornerstone of cultural tourism. The Witch House, home of Judge Corwin, stands as the only building with direct ties to the trials, its low-ceilinged rooms evoking the claustrophobic anxieties of 1692. Gallows Hill, where executions are believed to have taken place, draws visitors eager to tread the same windswept meadows where 20 innocent people met their end. Each October, Salem's haunted happenings blend kitsch with solemn remembrance. Street parades, psychic fairs, and horror-themed attractions sit alongside historical tours and academic lectures. The town's unofficial motto, Remember Salem, underscores a collective desire to confront rather than erase its fraught heritage. Aram. Modern parallels, digital specters, and social media panics. The mechanism of false accusation has morphed but persists. Online cancel culture can replicate Salem's logic. A misinterpreted tweet or an unverified rumor can spawn collective outrage, social ostracism, and career-ending consequences, all wielded without the due process of open dialogue. As in 1692, the rush to judgment often outpaces careful investigation, and the temptation to assert moral supremacy can blind communities to nuance. Just as clergy and magistrates once clung to spectral evidence, today's digital mobs can mistake algorithmic amplification for objective truth. The lesson of Salem, that fear and rumor can warp justice, rings louder than ever when every individual holds a pixelated metaphorical stake in the public square. Irtavde, lessons learned, vigilance, empathy, and the value of doubt. Salem's ordeal crystallizes timeless truths. First, even the most devout societies can succumb to collective irrationality when external pressures, war, disease, economic hardship, erode communal trust. Second, legal systems must guard against untestable evidence and preserve standards of impartiality, lest they become tools of persecution. Third, empathy and space for dissenting voices, like Increase Mather's cautionary pamphlet, are essential antidotes to mass panic. Finally, allowing doubt and uncertainty into civic discourse protects against the escalation of fear. When villagers pause to ask, what if we're wrong, rather than who should we blame next, the trials lost their momentum. In our own crises, whether public health emergencies, political upheavals, or viral misinformation, channeling that moment of collective humility can avert the worst excesses. Divyadi, onward to closure, awaiting Part 4. With the machinery of Salem's witch trials grinding to a halt, survivors began the slow work of rebuilding shattered communities, hearts, and faith. But their scars, both physical and psychological, endured, passed down through diaries, family lore, and the very landscape of New England. In our next and final chapter, we'll explore how the memory of 1692 shaped American legal reforms, inspired generations of artists and scholars, and became a foundational myth of resilience, reminding us that history's darkest storms can give way to renewed light if we learn to read the signs wisely. Part 4, Echoes in Law, Literature, and the American Psyche 1, The Birth of Due Process, Legal Lessons from the Gallows. In the years following Salem's inferno, colonial courts, haunted by the memory of innocent blood spilled, began tightening the screws on evidentiary rules. No longer would an unseen specter or a hysterical girl's shriek carry the weight of a death sentence. By 1697, Massachusetts judges insisted on tangible proof, a confession signed with one's own free will, eyewitness testimony to actual deeds, or physical evidence of maleficia, curses, or poisons. The dramatic reversal was codified in the 1702 Charter for the Province of Massachusetts Bay, which explicitly forbade spectral evidence and guaranteed the right to counsel, an early nod toward protections later enshrined in the U.S. Bill of Rights. Paradoxically, the very machinery that once fueled hysteria became the model for liberty's safeguards. Habeas corpus provisions, trial by a jury of one's peers, and the presumption of innocence all found firmer footing in the wake of Salem's missteps. When the U.S. Constitution was debated nearly a century later, delegates whispered about the specter of unchecked panic and cited Salem as a cautionary tale. "Let no unexamined rumor become our scaffold," warned one Federalist essay, echoing the voices of clergymen who'd once pleaded for temperance at Court Square. Dusra, artistic exorcisms, from pamphlets to novels, long before Arthur Miller dramatized Abigail and Proctor, 18th and 19th century pamphleteers and poets wrestled with Salem's legacy. Cotton Mather's wonders may have defended some trials, but it also preserved grisly details that inspired Gothic aficionados. In the 1760s, folk ballads lamented brave Nurse Rebecca and Goodwife Good, transforming them into tragic heroines whose names carried both sorrow and admiration. The Romantic era revived Salem's ghosts. Nathaniel Hawthorne, descended from a judge who condemned witches, explored inherited guilt in the House of the Seven Gables. Though not a direct account, its crumbling mansion and vengeful spirits mirrored New England's haunted psyche. Hawthorne admitted in his journals, "Salem's past is a plague on every proud heart. We cannot build our futures until we bury those skeletons." His work spurred readers to confront ancestral sins, blending real and imagined horrors until the line between history and myth shimmered like the Milky Way on a clear night. Moondrum, pilgrims of tragedy, Salem as cultural tourism. By the mid-20th century, Salem had embraced its dark chapter as both caution and commodity. Guided tours wind through crooked colonial streets, past the witch house's low eaves and up Gallows Hill's windswept slopes. Actors in period costume reenact courtroom scenes, reciting indictments with chilling precision. Did you see Goody Proctor's spirit pinch the child? Visitors, at once horrified and enthralled, nod gravely as if absorbing sacramental truths. Every October, Salem's haunted happenings transform the town into a carnival of the macabre. Paranormal fairs, psychic readings, and elaborate light shows blend with historical lectures and solemn memorial services. Vendors hawk witch hats and spell kits, while local historians offer guided meditations at Rebecca Nurse's unmarked grave. The juxtaposition, sardonic tchotchkes beside tearful wreath-laying, reflects a collective urge to both profit from and atone for the past. It's as if Salem itself were a witch, demanding tribute before granting absolution. Nangavada, academic reckoning from feminist reappraisals to cognitive science. In recent decades, scholars have dug beneath the sensational surface to expose deeper currents. Feminist historians view the trials as an eruption of patriarchal anxieties. Women who defied gender norms, healers, midwives, outspoken souls, became lightning rods for communal fear. Anne Hutchinson, who preached against clerical authority decades earlier, was reassessed as a proto-rebel whose spirit lingered in Salem's green-gowned accusers. Their trials, these scholars argue, were as much about controlling female agency as about expelling the devil. Psychologists and cognitive scientists, meanwhile, have mapped Salem as a case study in mass psychogenic illness. Experiments in group behavior reveal how emotional contagion, authority bias, and confirmation echo chambers can produce identical symptoms in dozens of people. When a respected girl convulsed in terror, her peers, primed by sermons about Satan's power, joined the dance. Modern parallels abound. Clusters of unexplained ailments in workplaces, mass panic during public emergencies, even viral TikTok challenges triggering psychosomatic reactions. Salem reminds us that the human mind, left unchecked, can weaponize itself. 5. Political metaphors, witch hunts in modern discourse. The phrase witch hunt has seeped into everyday language. a shorthand for unfair persecution or ideological purges. McCarthyism in the 1950s cemented the parallel. Blacklists, loyalty oaths, and televised hearings echoed Salem's trials, swapping witches for communists. Senator Joseph McCarthy, seizing on Cold War anxieties, asked, "Who in America is loyal?" In much the same accusatory tone as Reverend Paris demanding, "Who among you harbors witchcraft?" Families were ruined on hearsay, careers destroyed by unsubstantiated factional whispers. More recently, political operatives warn of cancel culture as a 21st century witch hunt. A single tweet or misinterpreted post can unleash coordinated outrage, career derailments, and public shaming. Critics point to the absence of due process, no right to cross-examine accusers, no formal appeals, and swift punishments by a court of social media. The metaphor's endurance testifies to Salem's uncanny resonance. When a community succumbs to fear and divides along in-group or out-group lines, rational discourse falters and the dark arts of demagoguery prevail. Aravada. Educational imperatives, teaching Salem's full story. Classroom debates over Salem challenge educators to balance scandal with scholarship. Simply retelling lurid anecdotes risks reducing history to sensationalist gossip. Today's curricula pair trial. Transcripts with lessons on colonial geopolitics. King William's War on the Frontier. The cramped conditions of Puritan villages, and the theological straitjackets that shaped every sermon. Students analyze original bills of indictment, spot logical fallacies, and investigate climate data showing years of crop failures preceding 1692. Interactive simulations let learners assume roles, magistrate, accuser, accused, and grapple with ethical dilemmas. Would you ban spectral evidence if your friend were on trial? These exercises foster critical thinking and empathy, reminding students that history is not an exhibit behind glass, but a mirror, reflecting the choices each generation must negotiate. Iram, Memorials of Conscience, Apologies and Acts of Remembrance. In 1957, Governor Foster Furcolo issued the first state apology to Salem's victims, acknowledging the grievous wrongs committed by our forebears. Erected in 1992, the Salem Village Memorial, a simple granite circle inscribed with the names of the 20 hanged and 1 pressed, stands near Gallows Hill. Visitors leave tokens, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, a ribbon for reconciliation. Annual ceremonies on May 19th, sadly less attended than Halloween parades, include candlelit vigils and readings of trial survivors' letters. Local clergy recite psalms of penitence, while community leaders unveil plaques at former meeting houses. These acts may seem small against centuries of injustice, but they bind a community to its conscience, insisting, "We remember, we learn, we vow never again." 8. The psychology of remorse, collective guilt, and healing. Salem's story doesn't end with legal fixes or tourist brochures. It lives in collective memory and the rituals we enact to exercise shared guilt. Psychologists note that communal apologies, public memorials, and structured atonement rituals can ease intergenerational trauma. In Salem, these take the form of educational grants for descendants of the accused, scholarships named after Rebecca Nurse, and oral history projects capturing family stories. When former magistrates' houses were converted into community centers, their old courtrooms became libraries, their gallows-adjacent green turned into gardens of healing herbs. The very landscapes of accusation have been repurposed into spaces of learning and restoration, transforming sites of fear into seeds of hope. Divyadi, Salem's unfinished business, vigilance against new panics. 4 centuries on, Salem's caution echoes. Natural phenomena can become infernal scripts, legal safeguards can be cast aside, and communities can conspire against their own members. As climate change brings unprecedented disasters, pandemics morph into conspiracy theories, and digital echo chambers amplify outrage, we risk repeating Salem's nightmares. To prevent history's darkest chapters from recurring, we must guard evidence standards, demand verifiable facts, transparent processes, and the right to defense. Cultivate empathy, listen to marginalized voices before labeling them other. Embrace doubt, question collective certainties, and allow for grace in uncertainty. Remember rituals of atonement, apologies, memorials, and education aren't optional extras. They're essential to societal health. Salem's legacy doesn't just lie in dusty books or tour group anecdotes. It pulses in our legal codes, our cultural metaphors, and our daily choices about whom we listen to and whom we condemn. The meteor shower that once lit Puritan skies was a natural marvel, yet it ignited horrors born of fear and ignorance. May our gaze to the heavens remain one of wonder, not dread, and may Salem's ghosts guide us toward justice, compassion, and the courage to say, "I may be wrong," before crying, "Witch?" Ever wondered why 17th century aristocrats commissioned portraits of themselves clutching skulls, or why clocks and Dutch still life paintings tick alongside rotting fruit? Welcome to the macabre world of Memento Mori, art's obsession with death that turns canvases into haunted mirrors of our own mortality. Let's unearth why artists couldn't look away from the Grim Reaper's grin. In the dawn of human creativity, death stalked every canvas and carving. Our Paleolithic ancestors painted at Chauvet Cave under flickering torchlight, their handprints ghost-like on stone walls, perhaps a silent prayer to departed kin. Fast forward to ancient Rome, and Memento Mori became a personal accessory, a toast of respect posed to look behind you at banquets, reminding wealthy patricians that beneath their togas lay nothing but dust. Hosts famously placed a skull on the banquet table or whispered, "Remember you are mortal," into the ear of a victorious general parading through Rome, turning triumph into a sobering reflection on life's fleeting applause. By the medieval era, Europe was enthralled to the ars moriendi, the art of dying well, a handbook guiding Christian souls through their final breaths. Illuminated manuscripts depicted death as a skeletal fiddler, orchestrating the danse macabre, kings, peasants, and paupers dancing hand in hand toward the grave. Cathedral murals, some still faintly visible on stone walls, showed crowned monarchs and beggars alike falling into death's embrace, each step a verse in humanity's collective requiem. Yet Memento Mori wasn't merely a devotional tool, it was also a booming market for guild-trained artisans. Medieval woodcarvers in Flanders produced death's heads, oak reliefs of skulls flanked by hourglasses, for wealthy merchants' tombs. Plague-era cadaver tombs in London featured ghoulish, transy figures, skeletal effigies lying supine, rot-ridden flesh peeling back in carved alabaster to reveal bones. These weren't meant to terrify alone, but to instruct. Even nobles must decay, and the afterlife awaited all without regard to earthly rank. The Renaissance raised Memento Mori to a new artistic altitude. Humanist scholars revived classical themes, while patrons demanded portraiture that flaunted status, yet also hinted at vanity, in the passage of time. Enter Hans Holbein, the Youngers, the Ambassadors, 1533. A double portrait of wealthy diplomats surrounded by luxuries, globes, musical instruments, a celestial sphere. Across the floor lies an anamorphic skull, visible only when the painting is viewed from an odd angle, reminding viewers that knowledge, music, and power vanish in death's shadow. Simultaneously, Italian painters like Giorgio Vasari embedded tiny skulls or wilting flowers in Madonna and child scenes, weaving mortality into even the most sacred narratives. In scientific circles, anatomists such as Andreas Vesalius illustrated human cadavers with such clinical precision that his Fabrica, 1543, became a grim artistic manifesto. Beneath our living flesh lies a fragile scaffold destined to collapse. As the Counter-Reformation raged, Catholic art seized on Memento Mori to compete with Protestant austerity. Gian Lorenzo Bernini's Baroque sculptures, such as the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, portrayed spiritual agony with hyper-realistic detail, drapery clinging like flesh, angelic arrows poised over a swooning nun. Elsewhere, Spanish still lifes, bodegones, by Francisco de Zurbarán, depicted skulls atop dusty ledges, next to cracked eggs and extinguished candles, a visual sermon urging contemplation of life's brevity amid Catholic iconography. But it was in the Dutch Golden Age that Memento Mori found its most elaborate expression. Prosperous merchants commissioned still-life paintings, vanitas, as conversation pieces for canal-side manners. Jan Davids de Heem's Vanitas Still Life, circa 1640, overflows with gilded goblets, exotic shells, and a globe tinted with colonial ambition, all encircling a skull. A silver pocket watch drips over a ledge, its chain tangled like fate's knot. A half-peeled lemon, bitter yet tempting, serves as a zesty metaphor for life's deceptive sweetness. These objects formed a silent catalog of wealth's vanity. The more opulent the display, the sharper the reminder that death shreds status like tissue paper. Portrait painters of the era likewise embraced Memento Mori. Rembrandt experimented with self-portraits that show him age, eyes sunken, hair unkempt, an artist confronting his own impermanence. In an intimate 1652 etching, he depicts himself gazing into a mirror, hand raised as if to trace the wrinkles that betray time's passage. It's as though Rembrandt invites us to share his mortality, every brush stroke a confession of vulnerability. By the Enlightenment, Memento Mori lurked on gravestones rather than canvases. Carvers in New England's Puritan colonies favored winged skulls, death's heads, capped with cherubic features as symbols of resurrection. Yet popular prints and broadsheets kept the tradition alive. Allegorical engravings of death-wielding scythes circulated widely, reminding even literate commoners that, in the midst of life, we are in death. The 19th century's Romantic movement reanimated Memento Mori with Gothic flair. Writers and painters turned graveyards into lyrical landscapes. Caspar David Friedrich's Abbey in the Oakwood, 1810, shows ruins silhouetted against twilight, a tiny procession of monks winding toward the vines clutching a broken tomb. The painting breathes a sublime melancholy. Nature reclaims stone, and worshippers tremble before ruin. Meanwhile, American photographer Julia Margaret Cameron staged ethereal portraits, where models hold lilies and gaze dreamily past their snow-white hair, visages evoking saintly transcendence where beauty and decay entwine. As photography matured, Memento Mori found new life in post-mortem portraits. Victorian families posed with deceased infants or grandparents, propped upright in chairs, eyes closed in mock slumber. These eerie studio sessions preserved the dead as if they slept, a testament to both grief and the desire for remembrance. Cabinet cards featuring cherubs and wreaths often bore inscriptions like "In Loving Memory," merging sentimentality with stark reminders of mortality. Modern and contemporary artists have continued the tradition with visceral innovation. Edoardo Paolozzi's skull sculptures, assemblages of automobile parts and machinery, comment on industrial death, technology's promise entwined with environmental ruin. Damien Hirst's For the Love of God, 2007, a platinum skull encrusted with 8,601 diamonds, literally commodifies death, turning mortality into a luxury object. It's a dazzling provocation, a skull more valuable than any living being, mocking the idea that wealth can conquer oblivion. Street artists like Banksy incorporate Memento Mori in public spaces, stenciled skulls peering from crumbling walls, spray-painted butterflies alighting on bones, reminding passers-by of urban decay and social inequalities. Performance artists, too, have embodied mortality. Marina Abramovich's endurance pieces involve silence and stillness, confronting both artist and audience with the fragility of the living body under the ticking clock of time. This first chapter of our dive into Memento Mori art has traced its evolution from ancient banquet warnings to contemporary diamond-encrusted skulls, revealing how artists across millennia have grappled with death's inevitability. We've seen how cultural contexts, from Christian doctrine to capitalist extravagance, influence the symbols and settings of mortality's mirror. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the psychological pull of Memento Mori, how these images shape our fear of death, fuel our creative's obsessions, and inspire innovations in how we remember and memorialize life's fragility. Part 2, The Pull of the Skull. Why we can't look away from death in art. Artists have long known that showing us our own mortality is a masterstroke for grabbing attention, and nothing grabs harder than a skull, a skeleton, or an hourglass running out of sand. In this chapter, we delve into the psychological magnetism of Memento Mori, its global permutations, from Mexican Dia de los Muertos to Japanese ossuaries, and how these deathly images fueled fashion, jewelry, and the dark celebrity of collectors. Death as trendsetter, fashioning mortality. If flouncy ruffs and doublets defined Elizabethan style, then death motifs were the ultimate accessory. In the late 16th century, wealthy courtiers commissioned mourning jewels, set with black enamel, jet beads, and carved bone. These came in rings, lockets, and pendants featuring skulls or dripping tears, proof that even the richest Europeans indulged a macabre fascination. Wearing a skull ring signaled refined taste, and perhaps a flair for the dramatic. But it also broadcast, "I'm mortal, deal with it." Across the channel, French aristocrats took the trend further. Catherine de' Medici, mother of 3 doomed sons, wore a heavy gold bracelet engraved with skulls after each child's funeral. Legend says she slept with it on, declaring that grief was a permanent fashion statement. Portraits show her dark eyes rimmed with kohl, a funeral collar at her throat, and that bracelet, ensuring viewers remembered both her power and her personal tragedies. In the courts of Mughal India, Memento Mori appeared in poetic couplets and miniatures. Emperors like Jahangir collected talismans carved from sardonyx bearing verses, "I too shall crumble as these sands." Their poets chanted at gatherings, reminding guests that life's sweetness was fleeting. Even as gold domes gleamed under the sun, courtiers nursed private anxieties in prayer, gardens shaded by cypress trees, symbols of eternal life and silent death. Across the oceans, Mexican death festivals and ossuaries. While Europe courted death in silent contemplation, Mesoamerica turned it into carnival. Long before Hollywood skeletons started line dancing, Aztec rituals celebrated Mictecachihual, the Lady of the Dead. When Spanish colonizers brought Catholic All Saints festivals in the 16th century, indigenous and European traditions fused into Dia de los Muertos. Today's sugar skull face paint, marigold altars, and papel picado banners are direct descendants of this Memento Mori carnival. Vivid celebrations of mortality wrapped in candy and candlelight. Meanwhile, in Capuchin crypts across Europe, ossuaries displayed bones in Baroque patterns, arches, chandeliers, even chandeliers shaped like skulls. Visitors to Rome's Capuchin crypt or the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic emerged from the bone chapels with a peculiar combination of disgust and awe. These bone churches crashed through the usual boundaries of sacred art, making viewers confront skeletons arrayed as wallpaper. A sign at Sedlec warns, "What you are now, we once were. What we are now, you will be." Hard to scroll past that on social media. Collectors, cabinets of curiosity, and the celebrity of decay. By the 17th century, cabinets of curiosities, Wunderkammern, combined Memento Mori with natural oddities, walrus tusks, exotic bird feathers, and dried 2-headed calves. Wealthy patrons aimed to display mastery over nature's marvels and its macabre excesses. A skull from a dugong sat next to a Roman death mask. A South American tribal flute lay beside a plague doctor's painted wooden head. These early museums attracted wide curiosity. Visitors paid a coin to gawp at skeletons and ask, "What the hell is that thing?" One famous collector, Rudolph II of Prague, filled his castle with alchemical paraphernalia, lead crucibles, mercury, flasks, and skeletons he believed retained a spark of life. His court's dark reputation drew scientists and occultists alike. Tycho Brahe lectured on planetary orbits under school-top lecterns. John Dee corresponded with angels over a desk festooned with human vertebrae. For these patrons, Memento Mori wasn't just art. It was a tool for mystery, power, and intellectual intrigue. Art as therapy, consolation, and confrontation. There's a reason therapists now prescribe grief art and melancholic music. Confronting mortality can be cathartic. In 18th century Britain, mourning portraits featured families kneeling around a black-draped monument bearing a skull finial. Neoclassical artists painted funerary subjects, weeping urns, extinguished torches to help clients process loss. These images decorated drawing rooms like inspirational quotes, reminding viewers that sorrow was universal and life was a gift precisely because it ends. Victorian Britain took this further with post-mortem photography. Mourning families posed with deceased infants, eyes closed in peaceful repose. Some studios posed the dead upright, propped on chairs to mimic life. These haunting images circulated in carte de visite form, inserted into albums alongside wedding and travel photos, a testament to the era's fixation on memorializing the departed. Modern Memento Mori, tattoos, graphic design, and the skull aesthetic. Fast forward to the 21st century. Skulls and death motifs saturate fashion runways, logos, and pop culture. Designer Alexander McQueen embraced skull scarves as a signature motif, patterned silk proclaiming, "I know you're beautiful, but you're going to die." Streetwear brands plaster skeletons on hoodies. Skateboard graphics feature winged skulls leaving trails of flame. Tattoo artists ink realistic skulls on arms, mandalas made of bones on backs, turning skin into living, breathing memento mori. Graphic designers exploit the same instinct. Posters for horror films use minimalist skull silhouettes to signal danger. Album covers for metal bands morph guitars into skeleton hands. Social media filters let users don sugar skull makeup or age decay effects with a swipe. Digital memento mori for TikTok. Even yoga studios offer skull and crown classes with skull props, reminding yogis to breathe deeply and appreciate being alive in the moment. Death in public art, monuments and memorials. Contemporary artists have turned memento mori into public statement. Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial conceals names in polished black stone. Endless rows that, viewed in the reflecting pool, echo infinite loss. London's memorial to the missing of the Somme list thousands of unidentified fallen in uniform gray. The empty space echoes hauntingly like an ossuary's cavern. More controversial is the Capela dos Ossos in Évora, Portugal, repurposed in the 16th century from cemetery bones. Tourists wander its corridors under arches of femurs and skulls, pausing at the inscription, Nós ossos que aqui estamos pelos vossos esperamos. We bones that are here await yours. It reads like an Instagram caption destined to go viral. A graphic reminder that tourism, art, and mortality mix in the most surreal ways. Memento mori in film and literature. Writers and directors have borrowed memento mori tropes for centuries. Shakespeare's Hamlet cradles Yorick's skull to contemplate where be your jibes now, a scene so iconic it appears in countless film adaptations, from traditional to avant-garde. Tim Burton's Gothic palettes revel in skeletons and graveyards, cartoonish yet laden with meaning. His Corpse Bride literally marries death to love, crafting a whimsical dance macabre for modern audiences. Gabriel Garcia Marquez opens 100 Years of Solitude with a sense of predestined death hovering over Macondo. Flowers that wilt into skull shapes, patriarchs who rise as pale specters. Murakami's novels feature enigmatic wells where skull-shaped faces peer out, symbolizing the abyss within human memory. In these narratives, memento mori becomes a tool to explore fate, memory, and the uncanny. Digital death, NFTs, virtual graves, and eternal data. The digital age adds a new layer. Memorial websites let users build virtual altars with gifs of flickering candles and skull emojis. Online obituaries include video montages, Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come meets Wedding slideshow. Some cryptographers propose death tokens on blockchains that release passwords or digital vaults only upon a person's demise, fusing memento mori with smart contracts. Even NFTs get in on the act. Artists mint algorithmic skulls that morph over time, each iteration a reminder of entropy. Some collectors see these as digital vanitas, storing them in wallets that will one day be lost forever, echoing physical artworks whose provenance vanishes when owners die. Why we need the skull. Existential gadgets in the art of remembering. At its core, memento mori art scratches a psychological itch. It reminds us that our time is finite, inspiring awe, dread, and, paradoxically, gratitude. Seeing a skull on a silver pendant or a painting on a gallery wall jolts us from daily routines. It asks, what will you do with today, knowing tomorrow is not guaranteed? Artists know that confronting death drives creativity. It pressures us to live more meaningfully, to craft legacies that outlast dust. In that sense, a diamond skull by Hearst and a dusty hourglass by Holbein perform the same miracle. They make us pause, gasp, and reflect. They blend humor. Who else thinks skulls are cute? With horror, irony with reverence. They connect us across centuries. A medieval merchant and a modern hipster share the same flicker of recognition when faced with a skeletal grin. This immersive survey of memento mori's pull, from jewelry box to digital tomb, reveals its enduring power to seize our attention, provoke reflection, and fuel cultural trends. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll examine memento mori's role in memorialization, how artists and communities design graves, tombstones, and rituals to keep the dead present, weaving death into the fabric of collective memory. Part 3, Memorials of Mortality, Tombs, Rituals, and the Living's Dialogue, with death from grave, goods to headstones, the archaeology of remembering. Long before marble slabs and bronze plaques, ancient Egyptians packed tombs with pottery, food, and model servants, an early Memento Mori ritual promising the deceased eternal comforts. In medieval Europe, grave goods dwindled under church edicts but lingered in peasant burials. A sharpened knife for journeying souls, a simple clay jug for the next life's water. By the 17th century, stone markers became de rigueur, carved with skulls, winged hourglasses, and Latin maxims like memento, homo quia pulvis es, remember man, that you are dust. These early headstones turned churchyards into open-air vanitas, exhibits each name and date a stop-motion reminder that time spares no one. The art of epitaph, poetry on stone. Epitaphs are miniature sermons or poems, gluing the dead to our memories. In colonial New England, Puritan families favored terse inscriptions. Here lies John Smith, age 34, born 1666, died 1700. Repent, but some took creative license. One Rhode Island carver immortalized Mary Lewis thus: "Reader, behold what you must be. The wood's decayed, the nails rusty, the flame is out, the spark is fled, the house is gutted, the guest is dead." These rhymes blended moralizing with gallows humor, eliciting both sobs and wry nods from mourners walking the graveyard path. Garden of bones, ossuaries, and collective memory. When burial space ran out, communities resorted to ossuaries, bone depositories that became art installations. Prague's Sedlec ossuary arranges over 40,000 skeletons into chandeliers, garlands, and rosettes. Visitors pass beneath bone arches, their footsteps echoing among femurs and skulls overhead. In Rennes-le-Château, France, a crypt's columns are ringed with tibias, while a somber inscription warns, "What you are now, we once were." Ossuaries collapse individual identity into collective mortality, forcing the living to confront not just one, death, but an army of vanished neighbors. Funerary portraits and post-mortem rituals. Victorian post-mortem photography elevated Memento Mori to a family event. In dimly lit studios, photographers propped children on chairs, draped elders in mourning veils, and used hidden clamps to hold eyes open just so. These stiff portraits, faces serene in eternal repose, often hung above mantels, mingling with wedding photos and holiday snapshots. Today, they're unsettling antiques, but for 19th century families, they were consoling tokens. Proof that love persists beyond the grave's silence. Monumental ambition, mausoleums and memory palaces. The 19th century also birthed grand mausoleums. Wealthy Americans commissioned miniature pyramids or Gothic chapels on private plots, stone echo chambers of grief. The Brown-Smith Mausoleum in St. Louis rises like a temple of tears, its marble angels peering down at velvet-draped coffins. Visitors wander its hushed corridors, tracing names etched in gold leaf, pondering fortunes spent on permanent grief. These structures blur the line between sacred worship and social theater, memorializing the dead as both saints and status symbols. Public rituals, Day of the Dead and All Souls. Vigil art isn't confined to stone, it lives in ceremonies. Mexico's Dia de los Muertos transforms cemeteries into carnival grounds. Families build altars, ofrendas laden with marigolds, sugar skulls, and favorite dishes of the departed. Calavera makeup and music fuse joy with mourning, reminding participants that death is another chapter, not a final erasure. In Spain and Italy, All Souls' Day processions carry candlelit lanterns through churchyards, priests intoning prayers in Latin. These rituals animate the boundary between worlds, keeping ancestors close through color, song, and communal remembrance. Digital memorials, virtual cemeteries, and online remembrance. The internet birthed new graveyards. Virtual memorial sites let loved ones upload photos, music playlists, and written memories, an endless shrine accessible anywhere. Facebook profiles of the deceased become grieving grounds, with automated birthday reminders prompting waves of virtual flowers. Pixels of Memory projects map Wi-Fi-enabled headstones, allowing visitors to scan QR codes at gravesides and trigger recorded eulogies or holographic visuals. Death's art has migrated into bytes and bandwidth, yet the impulse remains unchanged, to give death a presence in our daily scroll. Interactive art, memory projects, and public participation. Contemporary artists invite audiences to co-create memorials. In New York's Tower of Voices, 128 wind chimes ring in honor of Flight 93 victims, each tuned to a passenger's voice recording. Visitors stand among the chimes, listening to fragments of laughter and farewell messages carried by the breeze. Elsewhere, installation artist Christian Boltanski constructed rooms filled with dangling light bulbs, each bulb representing a Holocaust victim, immersing spectators in a luminous forest of loss. These works transform passive observation into active remembrance, making the living participants in history's silent dialogues. Why memorial art matters: continuity, compassion, and confrontation. Memorial art is humanity's answer to oblivion. Carved stones, painted altars, digital archives, all serve as anchors in time, tethering us to those who've gone before. By engaging with these rituals, we practice compassion, acknowledging grief's weight, sharing stories, and weaving communal tapestries of memory. We also confront our mortality, facing the skull-marked roads that every life must travel. In doing so, Memento Mori art shifts from mere horror to a profound testament that to live fully, we must remember to die, and to remember those who have. In this chapter, we've journeyed through burial customs, public ceremonies, and modern memorial innovations, witnessing how art and ritual intertwine to keep death's presence alive among the living. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll explore Memento Mori's role in contemporary activism, how artists wield mortality motifs to fight injustice, spotlight environmental collapse, and inspire social change by reminding us that time is not infinite. Part 4, Mortality as a Manifesto, Activism, Ecology, and Social Justice through Memento Mori, Death to Profit, Corporate Graves, and Environmental Reckoning. Imagine a billboard-sized skull looming over an oil refinery, its empty eye sockets leaking. Black tar. That's the work of contemporary street artist Paulo Tavares, who, armed with a can of environmentally friendly spray paint, transformed corporate logos into vanitous warnings. His black gold skull stencil went viral when it appeared overnight on a Chevron pumping station, a reminder that every barrel extracted accelerates ecosystems toward collapse. Business executives complained of vandalism, activists applauded the audacity. The skeletal visage, Tavares argues, punctures the pacifying greenwashing slogans, forcing passersby to confront the fossil fuel bargain. Cheap energy today, poisoned air, and flooded cities tomorrow. Across oceans, the Climate Skull Project mobilizes global communities to paint decaying skulls on riverbanks and coastal cliffs threatened by rising seas. Volunteers carve hourglasses into driftwood, fill them with polluted sediment, and mount them as public sculptures. Each hourglass is an ecological memento mori, a countdown of how many grains of sand have fallen since the Industrial Revolution. By embracing death's imagery, these installations flip environmental despair into urgent engagement. Visitors pause to photograph the art, share data about sea level rise, and sometimes even join cleanup brigades. Death, repurposed as a civic alarm bell, jolts otherwise complacent citizens out of their scrolling stupor. Body politic, human rights, and the skeleton, as solidarity when governments vanish. Dissidents, as in parts of Southeast Asia and Latin America, artists have responded with skeletal processions. In Mexico City, activists dressed as La Catrina, skirted skeleton ladies with sugar skull makeup, marched beneath banners reading "Justice for the Disappeared." Their painted grins served both as a cultural homage to Dia de los Muertos and a pointed critique. Smiling bones refuse to stay buried, even when state agents demand silence. Photographs of these marches circulate on social media, the stark black and white costumes cutting through algorithmic noise. Each image testifies these people died uncounted, yet in art they reclaim agency beyond the grave. In Eastern Europe, the Bone Brigade Collective casts plaster skull molds from unmarked graves of political prisoners. They then install these white skulls in public squares, one for each prisoner, inviting onlookers to inscribe names on them. As crowds add names, the squares fill with a forest of silent testimony. The Bone Brigade's founder, a sculptor named Anna Vasilev, explains that death's image levels power. A skull has no rank, no ideology. It only says, "I existed." By deploying Memento Mori in the service of memory, these artists confront impunity and demand that governments acknowledge lives erased by censorship or violence. Pandemic portraits, death in the time of COVID. The global pandemic transformed death from an abstract statistic into a collective trauma. In 2020, photographer Maya Lindgren launched Portraits of Remembrance, composing family members in black clothing against stark white backdrops, each holding a projection of their lost loved one's face painted on a skeletal mask. These living portraits were exhibited online and in pop-up galleries, accompanied by recorded audio of mourning voices and silent candles flickering on screens. Lindgren's work, an eerie blend of life and death, provided a virtual memento mori for a quarantined world, an invitation to grieve publicly when gatherings were forbidden. Simultaneously, muralist Diego Huerta painted a 200-foot-long frieze titled "The Plague of Our Time" on the side of a hospital. It depicted healthcare workers as skeletal angels, wings formed by ECG lines, wielding IV drips like quivers of arrows. By recasting frontline workers as guardians of life against death's advance, Huerta's skeletal iconography balanced horror with hope. The mural became a pilgrimage site for exhausted nurses and doctors. Some left flowers, others taped thank you notes beneath the painted ribs. Huerta's skeleton served as both memento mori and memento vivendi, reminders that life persists at the edge of oblivion. Digital ossuaries coding memory with bones. In the age of blockchain and augmented reality, artists are building digital ossuaries, virtual cathedrals of data where profiles of the deceased become interactive memento mori. The Crypto Cataract project transforms obituaries into non-fungible tokens, NFTs, embedded with 3D skull avatars. When a token is viewed, augmented reality overlays a skeletal visage onto the user's surroundings, a lamppost or coffee table, along with the departed story and favorite song. Supporters argue that this innovation combats digital ephemerality. Social media platforms collapse, servers crash, but blockchains endure, preserving the dead's presence in a cryptic ledger. Critics, however, warn of digital mausoleums that entomb grief in proprietary code, inaccessible to those without crypto wallets. In response, open-source collectives like Open Remembrance build decentralized graveyards where obituaries and memento mori artworks remain free and editable. Anyone can contribute a pixel skull, a poem, or a data grave marker. These digital ossuaries complicate the line between commemoration and commodification, but they undeniably extend memento mori into the networked present, ensuring that even as physical cemeteries fill, memory remains a communal enterprise. Wearable warnings. Mortality on the move street fashion has become a mobile canvas for activist memento mori. In Buenos Aires, designer Lucia Esteves debuted a line of biodegradable sneakers printed with skeletal foot bones on the soles. Worn during climate protests, each step stamped a fading trail of bones on dusty plazas, visualizing the crushed footprints of extinction beneath marching feet. As soles wore thin, the skeletal prints grew faint, an existential metaphor. Activism's impact, like life itself, risks disappearing without renewal. Elsewhere, in the streets of Johannesburg, youth collect plastic bottle caps and beads to craft skull-shaped earrings and necklaces. They sell these pieces to fund education programs for orphans of the AIDS crisis. The jewelry skull motif evokes the disease's toll while it transforming mourning into mutual aid. Donning the earrings becomes a solidarity badge. I stand with those who died alone. By wearing memento mori, communities find nourishment in collective grief, turning death's sign into a signifier of shared responsibility. Performance and protest, death's theater. Performance art has seized memento mori as a dynamic protest tool. In Mumbai, the activist troupe Skeletal Song stages silent flash mobs in major markets. Participants dress in paint-white suits and skull masks, then stand motionless for exactly 4 minutes and 40 seconds, the average global life expectancy lost to preventable diseases. When the clock ends, they vanish in a choreographed dispersal, leaving stunned crowds to ponder the void their disappearance creates. The sudden absence, juxtaposed with lingering whispers of the protest's purpose, transforms public space into a living funeral, hammering home mortality's direct link to social inequity. In Berlin, the group Requiem Riders organizes bicycle processions at dawn. Cyclists deck their bikes with white flowers and miniature skeletal lanterns, riding through streets once clogged with cars. The death pedal race culminates in the planting of a tree of bones, a wooden sculpture hung with dozens of small skull effigies representing victims of traffic violence. This mobile Memento Mori critiques urban planning's disregard for vulnerable lives, turning the city into an outdoor memorial and a call for safer streets. Artivism in galleries, institutional shock therapy. Museums and galleries have begun hosting Memento Mori exhibitions that double as fundraisers for justice causes. The 2022 Bones of Our Brothers show in London featured works by artists displaced by war, installations of barbed wire woven into skeletal cages, war-torn skull portraits, and shattered mirrors reflecting visitors' faces fractured like ceramic. Bones. Ticket Proceeds supported refugees and veterans' mental health services. In New York, the Whitney Biennial's Vanitas virtual wing included VR headsets transporting viewers into decaying urban landscapes. Skyscrapers collapsed into skeletons of steel, digital dust swirling in neon wind. These immersive experiences riff on Memento Mori to generate empathy, art that shocks both retina and conscience into acknowledging shared vulnerability. The power of paradox, humor, horror, and hope. Despite Memento Mori's grim subject, activist artists often infuse dark humor to disarm audiences. Nigerian muralist Ifeoma Azuka paints giant cartoon skulls with exaggerated expressions, closed-eye grins, or absurdly arched brows on school walls to promote anti-gang campaigns. Teenagers who might ignore a sober safety poster can't resist snapping selfies with Azuka's playful skeletons, then sharing them online with safety slogans. The art's paradox, laughter emerging from death's visage, creates a cognitive jolt, embedding messages more deeply than fear alone ever could. This blend of horror and humor reflects the deepest truth of Memento Mori. By confronting death's finality, we learn to celebrate life's absurdities. Activist art uses mortality not to paralyze, but to galvanize. The skull becomes a megaphone. Act now before your time runs out. Why activist Memento Mori matters. In a time when screens mediate most experiences, Memento Mori art cuts through digital saturation with primal urgency. Death's imagery transcends languages and cultures. A skull requires no translation. By coupling mortality symbols with social messages, climate justice, human rights, public health, urban safety, artists awaken collective conscience. The spectacle of bones challenges viewers to inhabit another's grief, or envision futures without intervention. Moreover, activist Memento Mori restores agency. In centuries past, mortality was a top-down doctrine preached by clergy. Today, skull-bearing artists and communities reclaim death as a shared resource for storytelling, protest, and healing. In public squares, digital realms, and everyday wardrobes, these deathly motifs remind us our time is finite, our actions consequential, and our futures intertwined. As this final chapter shows, Memento Mori endures not as morbid decoration, but as a dynamic instrument of change. When death's image becomes a manifesto, canvases turn into protest signs, sculptures into alarm bells, performances into calls for solidarity. And in that fusion of the macabre and the meaningful, we glimpse art's ultimate promise, to transmute mortality into moral urgency, ensuring that the skeleton's grin never quiets our capacity to act.